Good evening, everyone. It's nice to meet again. So this is the October 22nd, 2025 meeting of the Ashland Triboard, which is a meeting of the Select Board, the School Committee, and the Finance Committee. As it is a meeting of all the boards, if I could ask the chair of each board to call their meeting to order, and we'll start with the Select Board. Joe, if you wouldn't mind doing that.
Not at all. Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. Call the meeting on the Select Board to order at 6:15. Can't see the clock. 6:15. I'm sorry, my biological clock's off 2 minutes.
Turn the mic on.
It's on.
Yeah. Okay. And Ms. Tosti, if you wouldn't mind calling the
Yes,
school committee.
I'll call the school committee meeting to order at 6:13.
And I will call the Finance Committee meeting to order at 6:13. Finance Committee to order, 6:13.
Excellent. So 6:13, sorry, we're getting started a little bit later than what we'd anticipated, but you know, that's the way technology goes sometimes these days. But thank you all for taking the time to come here and assemble tonight and talk about the financial condition of the town of Ashland. It hasn't been that long since we've met. We actually met earlier this year a couple of times as we were going through the 2026 budget. And as we saw during the course of that time in those discussions, we're facing some serious financial challenges coming up. Well, actually starting in FY 2026, and they're actually only going to get worse as the years go on unless we take some kind of action and make some kind of decisions, which is one thing that we're going to be talking about tonight. I will say that even though this might seem, I don't know, kind of almost as if a surprise, and it might be a surprise to some of the residents, as I'll show tonight and as we go through it, and I think the superintendent would do the same thing, you'll see that this has been a time coming, and what we've been able to do is manage by being creative, by being hardworking, and by being selective in what we do and how we do it. So before I move on, I just want to introduce Superintendent Jim Adams, who will also be presenting tonight. And we have a number of staff here from both the school department and the municipal side. I won't take the time to introduce everybody, but I think their attendance here, I think, is important to note, just because, first of all, they've helped, you know, right the financial ship or continue to right the financial ship, but they're also very, very invested in what we do tonight and what we say tonight, and what you say tonight, I should say. So just to go over a little bit of the agenda tonight, we'll start. We've got a couple of new FinCom members. I know most of you know everybody here, but I will just, after the agenda, just give a couple of new FinCom members an opportunity to introduce themselves briefly. We will then move into Superintendent Adams' school department specific data presentation. Then we will go through the overall budget and municipal data and talk about that. And then we need to have an open discussion and talk about some of the things that we need to consider financially moving forward. And one of those is an operational override. And so what I am hoping comes out of tonight's meeting is you make a decision as a tri-board, and we'll do it through a straw poll, is whether or not you want to move forward in exploring an override officially. Okay, and I'll talk about next steps at the end, but that's my hope coming out of this meeting, is that a decision is made in regards to that. Okay, so without further ado, I know we have a couple of brand new FinCom members. Ken Early is here, and then Anton, I believe, is on Zoom. And Rohit, is this your... No, this isn't your first tri-board meeting. But Ken, if you want to just introduce yourself, make sure you bring your mic up here and use that big booming voice of yours to carry forward.
There we go. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ken Early. I am been a resident of the town for quite some time now. My wife and I are raising two children here. We have two kids in the Ashland school system that we love. We love the town very much. To pay for those two children, I'm a lawyer. I practice law in the investment management business. I work at a firm called Mercer, which is a subsidiary of a large insurance company. I commute in and out of the city. As I told my FinCom colleagues, the only thing I really, really complain about is the commute. Other than that, I'm generally a pretty happy guy, and I'm very happy to be here, and it's very nice to meet you all. And I'm more than happy to answer questions about my background if anybody has them.
So, thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
And Anton, I believe you're hiding back there in the in Zoom land.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey guys, my name's Anton Takamarov. I'm also a new member of the Finance Committee. I've lived in Ashland since 2021, and I think I might actually be the only person here on Zoom because unfortunately today is my first day back from paternity leave, so getting back for 6 was a little tough. I'm also I'm an attorney. I practice commercial real estate at a firm called DLA Piper. And yeah, same as Ken, just willing to answer any questions you guys might have, and looking forward to working with everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, Anton. As you can see, one of our financial strategies is now to stack the FinCom with attorneys. So we can,
We have 3
in the
on
school
school
committee. So Lisa, Mead, I hate to tell you this, but the legal budget is being reduced. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Adams, who's going to go over some school-specific data regarding the financials. Jim?
Thank you, and welcome to the new members. Throw you right into the scalding water of having just conversations about town finances and overrides, et cetera. So again, for the community, Jim Adams, Superintendent of Schools, and I'm just going to present really a grand overview of where we are from a school perspective with finances, because I think as we look at finances from the general government and the school side, obviously, Michael and I have worked well together. This is my, 12th year as superintendent, and we've really worked hard at developing a relationship and working through the financial impact of not only the schools, but some of the special considerations of schools, such as, the building projects in town, the apartment complexes, the move-ins, the special education costs, the rising special education costs, the cost of transportation, utilities. All of these things are really having a detrimental impact on our overall budget. And I just want to, again, share an overview of a projection, if you will. And I want you to take some of this with a grain of salt, because obviously we don't have true numbers as we move forward for FY 27, 28, 29. But I'm trying to give you an overview of what it looks like, or what Chris Matthew and I and Mike Kyra have looked at in terms of the data to ensure that what we're presenting to you tonight is really pretty accurate in terms of a vision of where we are. So before I begin, any questions on really what I'm looking to present here? No? Great. Michael, how do we do this? Okay.
There should be a way, there's a diagonal arrow that should be.
Yeah, I should probably put my glasses on, huh, Mr. Kendall? This thing here?
Yeah.
There you go. Now I got nothing.
Delete.
Yeah, we'll just stick with it here. Okay. So this screen here, and I apologize for not having handouts for y'all, but some of this got finalized a little while ago, to be honest with you. Partly, I'm giving you a presentation here that makes a number of assumptions, right? And these assumptions go back to policy and conversations that we've had as a community over the past 12 years, to be honest with you. And really where we've begun our conversation from a school perspective is when we look at our operating budget or our appropriated budget. We typically start and have started with a 3.75% increase. That's where we've begun our budgeting process in years past. And that came out of conversations with the town many years ago and policy. This is the number that we stuck with. That doesn't mean that's where it ended up. It just means that's our beginning point. So what I am trying to do here is really show you what 3.75%, if we just stayed on that number, what does that really look like in terms of service delivery, in terms of our ability to manage a school system of 3,000 kids, 500 employees, and close to a $50 million budget. So I think that's important, step number one. So FY27, for instance, would look like a $1.66 million increase at 3.75% over the appropriated budget we had in the Springtown meeting. So you can follow the trail there, right? But what I think is critically important is that you understand that's really not our budget. That's what's appropriated that comes out of taxpayer funding. The rest of it, the rest of our budget comes through either grant funding, school choice funding, so students who are choicing into our system. It comes from charging families for transportation. It comes from charging for rentals of our facilities. It comes from many years ago of hosting international students. So there are a number of things that go into the budget that you don't see as an appropriation. And I think that's critically important because when we start losing school choice revenue, when you start losing building revenue, when you start losing grants, potentially from the federal government, those all have really negative impacts on the overall service delivery to our students and our families. So in this instance, I'm giving what it looks like, and again, this is a higher level overview of the budget itself, right? So we have grant funding of $882,000. We have school choice revolving, meaning we have and use school choice monies to help offset our budget. So it balances to that, whatever that number, appropriated number is, right?
Just in case everybody doesn't know what school choice,
Sure.
do the 5-second version of that.
I'll do the 5-second, $5,000 version. So school choice in Massachusetts is, under Mass General Law, allows for school districts, towns to opt into the ability to have students come into your community from other communities. You get $5,000 a student. That's what we get for a school choice student. So each year, the school committee has to vote on whether to open up seats or not. So I'll give a quick example. Let's go freshman year, high school, 5 seats are opened by the school committee in April. We fill 5 students who come into Ashland High School, say from Framingham, Holliston, wherever, you get $25,000. So that money can be used for any purpose. Unlike transportation, which has to be used specifically for transportation expenses. So when we charge families to utilize the busing, that has to go towards paying for transportation, where school choice funds can be used for anything. Okay, so is that, yes?
I have one question
Sure.
on that in regards to when you then look at Chapter 70.
Yeah.
So we get $5,000 for the students that are coming in for school choice.
Yep.
But then when we go back and we do the review of our student numbers for Chapter 70, do we get additional funds for those students?
No.
Or not?
No, they are
So
out,
we're
they are
only ever
outside
going
of.
to get $5,000 a year
Well,
for each of those students?
At a
or-
higher level, Yolanda, yes. At a macro level, let's assume a student comes into the Ashland Public Schools who is a English language learner or who is on a special education plan. We get incremental revenues.
Okay.
In addition to the 5,000.
Perfect.
Right,
Great.
yeah.
That's what I just
But it's not correct. Joe, yeah.
Does that help ease the delta? Because-
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah.
I just have a very low voice. You want me to use my outside voice?
Use Donna's voice.
Okay, I'll use my outside cop voice, you won't like it. So if we, using school choice and say it's the $5,000, where's that delta? Because it costs Ashland, what,
Say $16,000 a student.
a student?
Right.
So you have an $11,000
Yeah.
delta. Where is that money coming from?
Yeah, so again, it's a challenge, right? So here's how I would look at it this way. Say we have 20 students in an English class, right? And the average per pupil cost is $16,000. We add one more student who's a school choice student to that 20, we're still paying the same, right? For the teacher to be in front of the kids, we're still paying for the lights for those 20 kids. It's so immaterial that,
Okay.
that it wouldn't matter. We wouldn't be adding students to our through school choice, should it put class sizes over a limit where you might have to hire another teacher. Okay? So we have space, if you will, within the classroom where it's being absorbed already, the teacher's already there, the lights are still on, the heat's on, et cetera. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Sure.
The seats are also per grade, so
Yeah.
it's very specific what we open up. It's not just broad.
I just want to make sure that the folks at home
Yeah.
that are watching this
Sure.
have a better understanding of what.
No, it's a great question.
Because they're going
Yeah.
to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, there's an $11,000 delta
So-
here.
Yeah, it can be very confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
May I just ask a
Of course.
quick
Yeah.
point of clarification? When you say 5,000, where is that money? Is that coming from the
From the state.
outgoing town or from the
Yeah,
state?
so it comes from the outgoing town, but through the state, it gets repurposed through the receiving town. So we have students who are out, who decide to go out of district.
That
It
comes
comes
off.
off,
Okay.
correct. If you look at the cherry sheet, I don't want to get too granular here, but on the cherry sheet, you'll notice there's school choice out and school choice in.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And obviously, our goal is to have more in than out. And years ago, we did not have that, right? We are in a position now where our choice numbers, because we are a highly desirable community to be in educationally, especially at the high school. And therefore, our numbers are certainly increasing. So, yeah.
Question, how many in and how many out?
So great question. Right now, we have just under 60 students in school choice, and we had less than 20 out. And that number varies. We'll know October 1, to be honest with you. Remember, we not only have students who are out choice-wise, but who attend Keefe, right? So that freshman year, they go to Keefe, and there's a different appropriation for that, right? So we probably have under 50 students at Keefe right now. So,
Thank you.
yep. So again, we're at like 47 million in terms of our real true budget, if you will. Appropriated 44. This is was an interesting task for me, to think about our budget driver projections. So what does it really mean and Michael says to me, hey, Jim, where are you with your budget? What's it really gonna look like? Well, there are lots of unknowns here, right? So let's just start with things that we can predict. We can predict, and I'll make sure everyone gets this slide deck. We can predict what our salaries are, our COLA, our cost of living, so that's their raises, steps, lanes, so teachers and educators and paraprofessionals, you move year to year based on your experience and your degree status, and other personnel contracts. About 1.6 million next year. That's the increase. I want you to keep that in mind, right? So, because let's just back up for a moment. What did I say our total increase could be at 3.75%? 1.6 million. So we haven't talked about anything else yet. 80+% of our expense, our budget, is salary, is personnel. So as we continue on with FY27, what else is happening? Well, we know for a fact right now that special education costs, out-of-district tuition costs, are going to increase probably close to 18% next year. So private schools who have our students in town for special education reasons, whether it's residential or day school, we know because we've already started receiving bills for next year or letters from these schools saying, by the way, our rates are going up by 21% next year, or our rates are going up by 15% next year. So if you remember 2 years ago, and I have a slide up here, it went up 18%, and then last year was probably closer to 10. These school district, or these school systems, private schools, are in an enviable position where they can basically set their price, and it's going to be approved at the state level. And that's a challenge for many districts. We may have less than 40 students, we do have less than 40 students out of 3,000 that are in out-of-district placements. Now, there's an offset for sure, which is circuit breaker, and we'll get into that a little bit. But as we're talking about local finance, state finance, the Commonwealth right now is under a lot of pressure to be able to meet mandated law, which is 75% reimbursement for circuit breaker. It's not going to happen this year, folks. We've been lucky the past few years where it has happened, or at 73%. There have been times where it's been in the 20s. And while state law says it has to be 75%, if the funding's not there, it's not there. So what's next? Increase in technology costs. We know on average it's about 10% of our technology, that's licenses, et cetera. But also, we have Chromebooks, a replacement cost. So we need to start filtering these into and figuring these into our overall operating budget. We don't have, as you know, there's not a specific capital plan that goes with the school system. We have a town-wide capital plan where folks work together, Chris, Mike's group, et cetera, to have conversations about what and how we fund capital items. I firmly believe that as a district and as an organization, this should be built into our budget. We should know ahead of time that we need these funds. Facilities expenses. Now, some could argue this is a much higher number than normal, but we're adding in, again, projection, right? If we're in conversation about the Ashland Public Schools being responsible for field maintenance of the Ashland Public Schools, now DPW is in charge of that, right? It comes out of the enterprise fund. It comes out of the general government operating budget. And we're in the process of saying, okay, should the schools be responsible for not only the rental facilities of our fields, as we do for our buildings, but also the maintenance and upkeep? This is a guesstimate, if you will, of $250,000. But listen, I've started looking at the enterprise fund and the math and the personnel that you need to ensure that our fields are up or are properly kept up. That's probably a low number. But I'm adding it in. Increasing utilities. Curriculum needs, English language arts. That's going to move over to FY28. We are in need of our curriculum change and the materials and the professional development. That's a pretty hefty number, $750,000. It's a one-time expense for the materials. It's an ongoing expense, obviously, for professional development in years to come. But as Mike and I were talking, this is something that we need to do in the near future. Less reliance on school choice. I talked about school choice being something we can utilize for any expense. Right now, we currently have 8 educators, 8 folks that we pay their salaries out of on school choice. That's $630,000. If school choice dried up, and just think about the math. We're spending $1 million in school choice this year. We're bringing in $300,000 over it's probably not very good, to think about, okay, 3 times the amount we're spending that we're bringing in. Probably not a good ratio, right? We're spending $1 million, we're bringing in $300,000. Eventually, because we have a reserve and we've built it up, that's going to be depleted. So where do these folks go? They have to go to the operating budget. That's just what has to happen. The ESSER funds that came in, the millions or $800,000 that we had in ESSER funds through COVID, we've absorbed a lot of those teachers in our operating budget. We were strategic about that. Then we have our federal funding of salaries, $266,000. What if those go away? We've got to be prepared. It's a mess. Transportation, about $152,000 incremental increase. The athletic annual operating deficit. We, as a community, have continually charged our families users' fees for athletics. I am of the belief athletics is just an extension of the school day. It is an extension of the school day. It is part of the public school educational process. Yet here we are, we continually charge families to participate. But guess what? We don't charge nearly enough to cover the costs of running an athletic program. And I've got a slide a little bit later to show you that. It's significantly different between what we bring in for users' fees, what we have built into the operating budget, and what we really need to run a program.
Jim, what's the typical
What's the typical athletic fee for students? I know that they vary a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to bring it up, Claudia.
Okay,
Yep,
good.
yeah, but good question. I have it in another, next slide, I think. So here's really where I'm going here. Estimated increase, assuming all of these things occur, right? Assuming we would need to absorb all $600,000 into out of school choice, assuming we lose all $266,000 of federal funds, assuming out of district is at 610,000 increase. Our true number in terms of an increase in the budget would be about $4.19 million. A 3.75% increase is 1.6, leaving us a deficit of 2.5 million. If you were sitting in the room with me in November with Chris, Mike, and our admin team, this is actually where we start our conversation. We're starting a conversation at a $2.5 million deficit before anybody even says to me, hey, Jim, by the way, we need another English language arts teacher. We need another English language acquisition teacher. We need these things in order to move our district forward. Then it compounds and adds on. So I've just extrapolated that for a 3-year window. So you can see that it goes from 2.5 to 3.1 to 2.5 again. So that's pretty consistent. Questions on this slide? Again, these are hypotheticals, obviously, with the exception of like our salaries. The first 3 or 4 are pretty consistent. We know what those are.
I think it's just important to point out that this is maintaining a status quo.
Yes, yeah, this is basically, you've got level service, right? Level service is one thing. We're not adding anything to our organization. Level funded, you would just give me the 44 million, right? And say, hey, have a nice day. And I'd be like, okay, I've got a $4.1 million deficit. Average teacher salary, you say, is 90,000. I've got to cut 50 people. Fine. That's sort of the conversation, right? That's going through your head. That's going through my head.
Just quickly ask.
Yeah.
Your CBAs, is this the first year of the 3-year?
No, this is the second year of a
The
3-year.
second year of
Yeah,
3-year. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah. So I will not spend a lot of time on this because it really is, baked into that last slide. This is our special education out of district costs, right? 18%, 10%, these are estimates. And there's a lot of fluidity to this. And I've been at town meeting with many of you, and the week before town meeting, a student may have come back into district, or a student moved out of district, or a student came into the district. We just don't know. And then when we become fiscally responsible, these are conversations that are really a challenge. We don't know what our numbers will look like, but I'm just showing you the incremental cost increase of about 791,000. That does not include potential reimbursement of the circuit breaker. I'll be clear. That's on another slide. But athletics. And the reason I bring this up, because we don't talk enough about this. I don't talk enough about this. I know what's going on here, Michael? There we go. In my 16 years here in the town, I can tell you we do not talk much about funding and have not talked much about funding athletics appropriately in our budget. We've made significant conscientious decisions on how to keep our classrooms running, how to add electives, how to ensure our students are getting the skills they need when they leave our high school to be successful elsewhere, whether it's in work, trade schools, college, military. We do a hell of a job. And I say that very proudly as a superintendent of schools. We do a great job. However, there are deficiencies within our budget and with how we've approached things. I believe athletics is a significant component to having a well-rounded experience, as well as the arts. We made significant investments this year in our budget in the arts programs at Mendez and at Warren, or at Mendez and at the middle school. I'm proud of that. Athletics, our operating budget. What's in our appropriated budget? It's $384,000. What does that cover? Could be salaries of the athletic director. Could be a little bit of transportation. Chris will correct me if I'm wrong. It's stipend positions for coaches. We collect about $290,000 in users fees. But the actual cost to run the athletic program is closer to $975,000. So we're typically running a $300,000 deficit. So you're like, Jim, how the heck do you then close that deficit? Well, at the end of the year, we're literally, Chris, I say we, and I say we, it's usually somebody else. Chris literally is going through line item by line item of the chart of accounts to determine, hey, do we have $1,000 savings here? Oh, phew, great, thanks, we do. Let's apply it to the athletic. Do we have $2,000 of savings for this teacher? Because we anticipated they were getting and moving to another step, but they didn't. Okay, we can apply it to, this is, again, it's a game you don't want to play very often. And that's similarly with enterprise funds, with revolving accounts, you don't want to do that too often. So here we have an example, Claudia, of what you were asking, right? $450 for ice hockey. $350 for alpine ski, football's $300, cheerleading, all the others, all those are $290. So really $290 is the number you look at for the most part. And then we have co-op teams. It depends on the school system, depends on who owns the co-op, if you will. They determine what that rate is. And I just give a little snippet here, Westboro, a very similar size school district, very similar community in terms of economic, socioeconomic status. They budget $515,000 in their operating budget. And they use $255,000 from user fees. So they're at the range, they're already $140,000, $130,000 more than we are just in their operating to start.
Does that include the field maintenance as well?
No, that's just running the programs. Transportation, coaches. And I'll give an example because this is hard to read. And this is why I think it'll be important for you to get. I break everything down, and my athletic directors do not like me, partly because I am a former accountant, and I want to break things down as granularly as I can to make sure that whatever we're doing, the best way possible. So in this instance, this is from last fall, right? Last fall, and it's even hard for me to read here. Last fall, we had 557 student athletes. Okay, that's middle and high. We have 850 high school kids, 600 plus. So we got 1,400 kids. Well over a third are playing and participating in extracurricular sports. We have waivers for those families who can't afford it, for the cost of playing sports, because it is expensive. And what I do is I break it down by sport, but really what you want to focus on is we brought in $120,000 in users fees at the bottom in the yellow, the third row over from the left. $120,000. It costs us $257,000 to actually run the programs. Okay? So that's pretty significant. So we're starting the fall with a $137,000 deficit in athletics. And I'll tell you, athletics certainly matters, right? We get more conversation with athletics than we do, oh, sorry, I can't do that. When I share the slide deck with you, you can click on that link, and it actually breaks it out for a full year. And you can see each season how that deficit gets created of $300,000. It's pretty significant.
Could you talk a little bit about waivers? How are
Yeah.
waivers achieved, and are they achieved that if a child plays by family,
Yeah.
by sports?
It's by sport. So you'll notice, Claudia, on the third one over, or the fourth one over from the left, so golf, for instance, had 3 students qualify for a waiver. So they have to fill out paperwork, whether it's free and reduced lunch, whether it's, we have the ability to look at specific data within our student management system to say, okay, this family's going to qualify. They ask, they qualify, they fill out a form, we go through the process. So it's significant. So there's $23,000 worth of waivers for student athletes. Significant. So Chapter 70, for those who are new to the table, this is the state aid that comes in. And what you'll notice is Michael and I have always been pretty conservative with our number because you just don't know. Like, we're town meeting in May, and in July, the state finally passes a budget. So that number can shift one way or the other. We had a huge increase in 2024 of 15.82% in Chapter 70. The Student Opportunity Act, the state government said, listen, we have yet to actually fully fund Chapter 70. And a lot of work with President Spilka for years and years on this. And finally it got through. Well, it's now tied to, so we're at a certain level, now it's tied to enrollment, the incremental costs of English language art or English language learners, free and reduced lunch, whether it's the special education. So there are lots of little factors that go into determine what child and how much you get per child. I think it's fair to say, based on what I'm hearing out of the State House, that, hey, a 1% increase is probably where we're going to land right now. That's $50. They start at the state level at $50 a child. If you're held harmless, if you will, meaning your numbers really are not significantly changing, or your numbers went down, and you basically get whatever they start with, $50 a child. That determines your Chapter 70, but it can't be less than what you had the year before. That being said, last year they adjusted it to 100, 115 maybe per child. So there's movement. It's not significant enough where Michael's going to count on $1.6 million in revenue like we had in FY24. It's not going to happen. Because one, our numbers aren't changing dramatically like they did. This was coming out of COVID. We had a dip initially coming at 21, 22. And then all of a sudden, COVID really, people felt a little more comfortable and they came back in droves. That helped in addition to the Student Opportunity Act. This is in the budget book from last year. You just noticed that we're spending $3.3 million in revolving accounts. Circuit breaker, which is the special education reimbursement for out-of-district students. I went through these: building rental, international tuition, school bus revolving, school choice. You'll notice our projected balance is really where, I want to land on this page, really. It's like we're projecting to have fewer and fewer dollars to run the system, to balance our budget. If we had to use $1.1 million like we're using this year for school choice next year in FY27, we'd have about $500,000 left over. I'm assuming we're going to get a few more dollars than we anticipated revenue-wise here based on the number of students who have actually school choiced in. I don't know what it looks like because they could decide to choice back out in the next, month. But that number could go as high as $350,000 for school choice revenue. So you'd add another 150 in, so you get to 410, use $1 million, you only got 400 left. It's a perilous situation to be in, to rely on revolving accounts to balance your budget. Student enrollment, you can see that 142 coming out of COVID increase, right? That is really when it hit for the 23-24 budget, when they started passing the SOA. That increase really helped us. We're up 12 kids from last year, as of yesterday. I look at enrollment every single day. It's probably drives me nuts and drives everybody else nuts that I look at it every day. But I do, because I want to know where we stand. And this is, I think we're flattening out a little bit. But I'm concerned, obviously, with continued housing, building projects. What's that going to look like? There is no true metric that determines what and how many kids are going to be coming in and what that profile of the child looks like. We just don't know. This is not updated because they have not finalized the FY24 per pupil district, but last year, to Joe's point, our number is 16,000 per child. I told you, this puts us in the bottom 10% in the Commonwealth, what we spend per child. All those other towns above us are, spending more. Holliston's number is going to jump ahead of us because they did pass an override. So I would say the majority of those communities have passed overrides in the past 5 years. Not in the budget. I haven't even talked anything about capital. I haven't said a word about this. I'm talking to you about a $2.5 million operating deficit. We have capital needs of $12 million. Roofs, modular replacement. Who's got kids at Warren? We bought those modulars 12 years ago. They had a 5-year lifespan. They'd already had a 5-year lifespan. We bought them used. We continue to refurbish. Turf replacement. Again, the turf's been in 14 years. Laptops. I use Macs, but apparently, the operating system now, Windows, you have to have an updated computer. You can't utilize the ones that we had for our teaching staff. Student management system. District data analyst. These are all things that actually bring in revenue to me as well. Like a data analyst helps us determine what we can do. Chromebooks are for kids. Boiler, I think the little munchkins at Pitaway deserve a little stay away from rain, which is a roof, and deserve to have a little heat. That's really where I am. And I will open it up for questions. I probably took a little longer than Michael wanted me to. But I can only say that the working partnership that we've had with the 3 boards has been unbelievable. We are an envious community around the Commonwealth. And I think the school committee would tell you the same when they go to, we have our upcoming superintendents and school committee conference in a couple weeks. Folks look at us and say, how do you do it? And I don't know how we do it sometimes, except it's really a collaborative effort in that this community has invested in schools, it's invested in capital projects, a public safety facility, a new Mendez. It's invested in general government, understanding public safety is critically important. But at some point, we come to a crossroads. And I'm sure, and we thought that crossroads was here a long time ago. We've survived to get to where we are. I couldn't be more proud of our budget in terms of the support the town has given us. We've averaged about a 5% increase in my 12 years. It's pretty significant. That's what makes people envious of us. How do you do it? It's at some point, those revenues from building projects are coming to a standstill. And what does it look like? What does this community want and desire? I want the early kids to have a great education. I want everyone in this room who have grandchildren and children in our schools to continue to expect the same level of success that we have, if not make it better. That's the challenge before you in this community. As a taxpayer in another community who's building a brand new $300 million high school, I get it. It's tough, it's hard. And my community votes for overrides as if they're like Pez candy. you know? And it is what it is. But that's sort of the situation we're in today. So I will leave it there. If you have questions specifically, I'm happy to answer them, and I will make sure you get the slide deck as well. Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, this is great.
Sure.
Exactly what we
Can
wanted to
you
hear.
pull the microphone?
Oh, of course, I'm so
closer to
sorry.
the
I'm
mouth,
not used to this, I apologize.
please?
Thank you. Thank you again.
Sure.
One thing we debate from time to time in Finance Committee is, we talk about other towns. Like this town does this, and this town does this, and then we talk about what that town's doing, and then we can nitpick and say, well, they're not exactly like us for this reason,
Yep.
which happens, right? And that's fair. But, in your experience and just based on what you've seen in doing the role and looking at these numbers, which of these towns should we potentially examine more closely that have been down this road, that maybe have done it what you would consider to be the right way? And as a follow-up to that, are there any cautionary tale towns that have gone too far, and then we should also examine that with the same level of vigor and energy?
Yeah. I think somebody asked me this question today. Actually, Chris and I were in a union meeting this afternoon, and we're talking about stipend positions and about looking at coaching salaries. Like, who would I really compare Ashland to, right? And who's done things the right way, or it's really comparable. Because you go on the State Department website and they say, okay, I don't know, like Billerica, Burlington are all towns that are similar to Ashland. No, they're not. No, they're absolutely not. I mean, have you been to Burlington? Have you seen the industry that exists there? Have you been to Dedham? They've got more money than anybody, right? But Westboro, although they do have some commercial, right? I think Grafton, I think Mendon Upton, the Nipmuc School District, I think are really high-quality districts that are worth looking at in terms of the work they've done to even consider passing overrides, et cetera. Cautionary tale, one of my favorite superintendents is in Franklin. They've had 3 overrides fail in the past year. And now their user fees for athletics, there's $1,000 to play football and hockey, and it's out of this world. It's a challenge for sure.
You said that was Franklin?
Franklin, yeah.
Excuse me, okay.
Yep. And they're a much bigger district than ours. They're probably almost twice the size.
Yeah.
But again, it's a community that has values education. It's an excellent system, but they've not been able to pass an override there. For the last couple of years, they've tried. Lucas is a good friend of mine, the superintendent. He's like, Jim, I don't know what to do. Like, failing by 10 votes or 20 votes, it's close, but right? But I would say those are the three communities that I think the school committee might have a different perspective on that. Mark does a lot with school districts and communities and towns and with his work. But locally, it's hard, right? Natick just passed. Holliston just passed an override. Are they worth looking at? Sure. They're a little smaller, but it's a local district. Medfield, DS, they don't go for overrides, but they can't get a building passed, which is interesting in Medfield. So
that's like a
Yeah.
part of the equation. Like, I feel from being here the last time, or even as far back as when the high school was built. But do you remember the last time we did collaborate with other communities? We
Yep.
researched
We
it.
did.
Some of us on school committee met with people, school committee members from other communities that had successfully, like Grafton. Remember, we had good relationships with them, got all kinds of input on what they did. We were in people's homes. I think there's a piece of it for me anyway, and it's anecdotal. I don't have anything to prove this, but it's just like getting into the head of the voters in this town. You know what I mean? Like, we feel like we did a lot of like the things. And I'm sure we didn't do everything perfectly, and maybe there's a different way to structure it that piques people's interests, if they have line items or something that we didn't do.
Yep.
But there's this thing about like, why are the people of Ashland like resistant to it, even when we do that homework and try to understand the best approach, and it still seems like it's not being accepted.
I'd love to hear from some people in the room why they feel like that is the way that it is.
Or maybe if you disagree.
I like that before. Go ahead.
No, Nikita wanted to.
No, actually, I'm not going not going to answer that question, but I actually had a question for you, Jim.
Sure.
First off, again, thank you very much for your presentation. Just as a point of clarification, I'm not trying to diminish the importance of athletics, but we've been talking a lot about
Sure.
athletics fees and such, but I just want to make sure that folks at home have a clear idea what the material impacts will be with the deficits that you say will run. Like, what are going to be the academic
Sure.
impacts of
Yeah.
that
So,
as well?
Yeah,
If you
no,
could be
that's a
clear.
great question. And the only reason I'm talking a little bit more about athletics is because it's not something we have talked about in 16 years. It just hasn't. And I think that's an important piece that we have to make sure we fund all of our programming. And again, that's just part of a whole comprehensive educational experience in a public school system. That's what I believe. In terms of what could be a drastic, again, I don't want to create this firestorm of this is what would happen, but think about $1.5, $2 million deficit that Michael says to me, or FinCom and the school committee says, hey, Jim, we've got to cut $2 million from your budget to make it balance. That only means teaching staff. That's what it means. It means administrative staff too, and I don't want to, like last year in our budget process, we reduced our admin team by 1. And I think that's really where you look first. But it could have detrimental impact on curriculum, reading specialists, coaching specialists. All those things matter to our students. But it's personnel, and it will move our system backwards. To what degree? I'm not sure, Makita. But we're talking, assume you lose 20 educators. That's pretty significant in this community.
Class sizes would dress.
Class sizes go
Right.
up. Yeah, 100%.
We lost all the libraries at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to think about it is, we talk a lot about closing gaps,
Right.
and achievement gaps and stuff like that. And to lose positions would make that nearly impossible to continue that effort, right? Because you'd be struggling more and more to just meet, to teach the needs, right? And so that's for me at least, that's the biggest fear. It isn't like, okay, we'd have to raise a fee here, we'd have to do, those are impactful for sure, but one of the things we continually talk about is making sure we close the gaps, and significant cuts would have a really big impact there. I think they would probably widen. We wouldn't even probably be able to keep them where they are. And so that to me is probably one of the easiest things to say. That is probably the biggest risk.
I agree with Paul, and also adding just general student progress. So, the gaps for sure will be harder to fill, but as you mentioned, just keeping our students on the same trajectory to continue to make progress is going to be a lot harder. And so those gaps will inevitably become bigger and be more prominent.
Joe, yeah.
Thanks, Jim. I just want to answer Lori's question about, you mentioned something about getting into people's heads and making sure that they understand what's going on.
Do you know how to do that?
Never mind. All I can say is that in years past, when we tried to do an override, we kept on saying, we need the money, we need the money, we need the money. And near the end of the fiscal year, there were monies available that came back. So now the people that are listening to us saying, we need this override, when in fact, well, when the true figures came in, we didn't need it. That resonates big time in every resident in town that can vote. And, Chicken Little, that seems to be an issue, and people don't forget.
So I'd like to weigh in on that. And just for people who don't know me, I'm Marcy Culverwell. I'm a new member of the school committee, also CFO of a medical school. So I spend a lot of my time in the numbers, and the environment we're dealing with from a macro perspective is completely different. We are post-COVID. The personnel cost has increased. That's a fixed cost in the town and the school budget, so that is totally different. We are in a new supply chain world than we were before, so the cost of goods, shipping, tariffs, all these buzzwords you hear in the media, that's a real cost that's going up. And then the other thing is the question of what funding we could get from both the state and the federal government is a complete real risk. And, you know, the government's shut down right now, so we're not blessed with the executive orders every week of what could change, but that's a real risk. So there's 3 new risks that exist that did not exist at the time the town tried for an override before, that we'd have to plan for. But the thing that is so key to me when I'm having discussions with people about, you know, why can't we do what we want to do, is the fixed cost is what it is. So to maintain the status quo, we absolutely have to educate people of this is the cost to live in this town, to maintain all of the wonderful services that we enjoy for our schools, for our other community members with the, you know, the senior center and everything we do, the library, all the things. And so we've got to make a decision as a town. Do we want those services still? And what is the cost of that? And if the revenue is not meeting that fixed cost without any additions of, you know, any new nice to haves, then there's that. And I think it's that simple. Like, that's it's just new, and everyone sees it on the news. So I'm very passionate about the numbers, but that's how I would frame it.
You know, Marcy, I think it is that simple. But the other piece that's that simple is that everybody is feeling that in their personal lives too,
100%.
right? So now it's not so simple.
Right, that's right.
Because now it's another place where my pocketbook gets hit. And certainly, you know, I'm certainly very,
I totally get it.
but it's just sort of a reality, and I think that that's, you know, part of what we're faced with. I think that that is a piece that we have to drive home, though. I mean, people need to be reminded of that 100 times over. I think some of the reasons we haven't passed overrides, you know, this community is very different from what it was 20 years ago. I think that was shown when we voted for the public safety building and for the high school. I think the other things that we always need to be thinking about is the additional fees that are placed upon families with students. And I agree with you, Jim, 100%, that especially in this day and age where kids are on their phones all the time, if you can get them in a sport, I think every parent wants their kid outside doing some kind of a sport or some kind of extracurricular activity beyond the school day. We have to think about trash fees that people pay, their water bills. You know, all those things are in addition to our tax rate, right? One question, I think it is important to look at other communities. You know, you just look at basically, I think, Mendon Upton, and it's a couple of $1,000s more per child. And so now you're talking, if that was us getting those $2,000, it would be almost $6 million, or, you know, I don't know exactly, but in a large number, right, that would solve our problems. And so when I look at the communities too, and I see Holliston and Hopkinton, and they're right in the same neighborhood as us. And now you said Holliston just passed.
Last year, yep.
Right? And Hopkinton hasn't. I know they've talked about it. So, you know, it would be nice if they were way up in the 20 grand per kid, but they're not. So how does that compete with what we see in our classrooms versus what their students get in their classrooms? Is there a way to differentiate?
There are a couple ways, right? I mean, we can look at standardized test scores. We can look at AP scores. Like again, we're looking at the end result of our students and what it looks like in the end. And I would say we're as successful as any district around with our students who are matriculating out of the Ashland Public Schools. And that includes, you know, Hopkinton, Dover, Sherburne, Medfield. Like, if you look at those numbers, we're there. I think Hopkinton's an interesting scenario, interesting case. They've invested a lot of money in their building projects, right? They built a brand-new elementary school, and as it opened, they still needed to go back and invest in another couple million because it was too small, because they didn't anticipate Legacy Farm and all of the number of students who were coming out of there. So I think that impact doesn't necessarily equate to the per pupil cost of running the school system. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, first of all, I agree with Marcy. I think that, I think the standard of what people's expectations are have changed a lot over the last, it's been 9 years since we've last gone for an override, and things have drastically changed. Our population has changed quite a bit, as we know.
Yep.
And our population is going to change more. I know you were looking at the enrollment numbers. When we think about these 40B projects, one of the things that, I don't know if, it's really well known, I'm sure, you're looking at these numbers, but for a 40B project, 10% of those units have to be 3-bedroom apartments. So when we talk about a 250 apartment complex at the Mill Building, you're talking 25 units of 3-bedroom units.
Sure.
So, you're definitely, I know we've talked in the past about the delta that happened when Cirrus was built, and it wasn't quite what we expected. But I think this is a very different, I think it's going to be very different, simply because these are going to encourage families to come to Ashland, which, I love to have families come to Ashland. But it's this controlled way that we can plan for all of this. And I think, so that was one thing. And then I have one other question for you, because I know you kind of glossed over the capital needs, and I think that is incredibly important, because if you think about the list that you had, and I assume those are things that need to be addressed in the next 3 years, that's $12 million in capital, that's additional $4 million per year if you spread it out. So now we're talking about a $6.5 million deficit, give or take. So it's the education, it's all the things that go into the budget, but I think that capital is just as important, because we can't keep pushing that aside.
Sure. No, I don't disagree with you.
Yep. So, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, just, I want to switch over to Michael, but to go back to your point, Joe, about the optics of, I think we try to do, not an alarmist point of view, and we don't try to say the sky's falling, but when somebody wants it, when we say we need an override, we are essentially in some way saying the sky is about to fall, right? And so when we then go have town meeting and there's $350,000, that's what happened 9 years ago, right? I think it was 350 was the number. But this is the challenge. Everything's complicated, right? And so responsibly, we still have to be doing that, because the Division of Local Services says we should have so much in free cash, and that's the proper budgeting thing. So how does that, that's the challenge, this is complicated. And it would be irresponsible of us to go over that cliff to the point where it's that dire at that point, because now if we're not meeting that threshold of what they're saying we should have for free cash, and now we go and we try to get accredited again, and now our credit is bad, and now we need an override. We've already done a lot of damage, and so how do we balance that? And I think that's part of the plan we really need to make sure we're thoughtful about, is we need to be able to articulate it without causing damage that we have to then come back from, right? But how do you do that? How do you get people to feel the pain or understand the consequences of making these decisions, but at the same time balance it? Building projects are now fully hitting our tax bills, and everybody's tax bill just went up in the last year, and I felt that everybody feels it, right? So we have to be thoughtful of that, and there's a lot of things that are complicated to balance. But to go back to your point, that is an optic. Even 9 years ago, when I had some idea of what things were like, and not probably as in-depth as I do now, it made me look funny at it. It's like, hey, why are we doing this? Now, I have a better understanding now of why we do these things, but I'm knee-deep in all this, and I know it to a certain extent, but I'm learning still. But we need to have, how do we get the other 12,000 voters who don't have that opportunity to spend all that time and energy on it? How do we message it properly to them? I think that's the biggest challenge is
It's a catch-22 with respect to that, because if we lose the credit rating that we have. We're spending more money for bond ratings and everything else, so now that compounds our debt. So we're not gaining anything by it, actually, we're losing now. And I'm sure Mike will talk about that in detail. Thank you.
Got to bring this down a little bit. So, hi, everybody. So before I really get into the meat and potatoes of this, I just want to thank and acknowledge Superintendent Adams and his staff, and also all of you, as well as our team. We are where we are today, and we are as successful as we are by virtue of the team that we have here. It's one of the things that has kept me here is our team collectively, staff, board members, volunteers. And it's one thing that I know is going to help us continue to be successful in the future, regardless of what happens. We are hardworking, we are creative, we have a can-do attitude that really, I think, is unmatched throughout the Commonwealth. As Jim alluded to, or Jim said, I experienced the same thing at the MMA conference. You know, how are you doing all of this stuff? You know, how? You know, because they look at the metrics that I'm about to show you tonight, and they're wondering, like, how does this work? And it's not magic, it's people. It's people. And we're going to talk about a lot of numbers. We've already talked about a lot of numbers. You're going to see charts and graphs and all that good stuff. But there is one primary question that you all need to be asking yourselves tonight, and everybody needs to be asking themselves. And Marcy alluded to it, and so did Brandy, is what kind of quality of life do you want to have? That's what it's all about. And that quality of life encompasses a lot of things. You know, it encompasses the costs that you pay, taxes, fees, but it also encompasses the services that you provide, or that we provide for you on your behalf. It also encompasses the events, the camaraderie you see at the corner spot, and the experiences that you have as a citizen, or excuse me, as a resident of this community. And so that is the primary question as we go through tonight and we go through this discussion as it extends throughout the budget season, is what kind of quality of life do you want and what are you willing to pay for it? Does anybody want to take a shot at what quality of life means to them?
I will.
Sure.
You know, just from the perspective of living here for so long, it's, I think it comes down to health, safety, education, community, certainly services that we enjoy, whether it's, you know, my street getting plowed or coming down to the town hall here because I need to file some sort of a form or what have you, and having that being done efficiently. It just means being solidly aware that the place that I am residing and living is the place that myself and my family belong from a comfort and also affordability perspective too. That's how I'd probably sum it up for the most part.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would feel similarly.
Yeah.
You know, it's what's that feeling you get when you wake up in the morning and, like, you know, you go outside and you see your neighbor, you know your trash is going to be picked up, you know your street's going to be plowed, you know when your kid gets on the bus is going to a safe school system that's providing a top quality education. You know, that's quality of life. That's part of quality of life. But we are here to talk about numbers as well. And so, as Jim talked about, I just want to kind of say this too. Projections, budget projections, they're as much an art as they are a science. Marcy, you know this as a CFO. You know, you're taking the best data that you have generally from the past and trying to factor in what do you want to include as part of your projections moving forward, and you come up with some numbers. And generally, I've been very, very conservative. I still am conservative. But this is what the financial picture looks like today. Okay, if we look into, we're in FY26 right now, if we look going into FY27 and beyond. Okay? So The primary drivers, as we've talked about, is we have the municipal budget going up 2.5%. And whatever that number is, whatever our collective bargaining agreements are, whatever our non-union increases are, whatever our fee and license costs are, we make it work within that number. It generally consists of about $350,000 every year now in the general fund, or excuse me, in the general government side. Okay? And then we also have the school department, as Jim mentioned, going up 3.75%. But what about some of the other things? Well, we've got Keefe Tech, which we take prior year numbers and we extrapolate that out through FY31. We look at the health insurance numbers, pension numbers. Obviously, we can't gauge what those are going to be exactly moving forward, but what we do is we look at what are the increases in the past, you know, what does that moving average look like, and then can we use that to project into the future. And then we also look at things like, you know, we know what our 2.5% is going, you know, we know what that figure is going to look like on a base levy, but the big unknown is new growth. And I've talked about this before. New growth is what you get when you bring on new buildings, when you add an addition to your home, when you add on a deck. All of that factors into new growth. And when you had a project like Cirrus, you saw new growth numbers go up to like 1.2 million a year. And that is money that is not, you not only get that year, but it gets added onto the tax levy, and you continue to see that each year. But over the last few years, that's dwindled down to $500,000. Big differences, big differences. So when you factor that all in, you know, what you end up with is basically I use new growth estimates of $500,000 moving forward each year, just kind of a base amount. Now, I have the levy limit right now at 27 going at 60.5 million, and it grows to 67.7 million over 5 years. But our expenses, they're going to continue to outpace our revenues. They already have. We've already talked about that. I'll review that a little bit. And so what happens is that, you know, in 2031, we have revenue of $90 million, but we have expenditures of $98 million. Again, that's 5 years from now. You bring it back to next year, you know, we're looking at a revenue number of $81 million and an expense figure of 83.6, so about a $2.5 million deficit for FY27. That's what we're looking at in the immediate future. As you're looking at these, there's one thing I want to introduce as a caveat. This does not consist, or this does not include the bond amounts, the taxpayer amounts for the Mendez School, because we have a ban, which is a short-term borrowing that ends next year. We're going to be bonding that long-term next year for, is it what, we've done how many years of ban, Cindy? 3? So it'll be a 27-year bond because it was a 30-year authorization. What happens with an override will determine how we structure that. That's why I haven't included it. You know, we can structure it, work with our financial advisor, and, you know, structure more on the front end, or more of a tax increase on the front end versus the back end. But that's what FY27 looks like, a $2.5 million deficit. So, who here has heard of a 40B project? Right. We've got 3 of them. Not only that, we have a number of projects that have been permitted and they haven't been built. So we have another 40B project that was permitted a few years ago, the Arbella at Ashland off Memorial Drive. That has not been built. That's in litigation. We have 501 Pond Street at 120 units. We have Homer Ave, which is at 29 units downtown. You know, when you look at all of those, Don, who is, I can't believe I'm saying this, the senior member of our finance team here in terms of tenure, who's been here a year, Don has projected, you know, what kind of tax increase would we look, or tax revenue would we look at once all those are built. And conservatively, I think admittedly, that number comes out to 4.2 million. So total. okay? And so what I did is I actually took, not that full amount, but I took $500,000 each year and I added it onto that new growth number. So we went from $500,000 each year to $1 million in new growth each year. So why did I do that? Why did I spread it out? These projects, if they get permitted, the ones that aren't permitted, if they get permitted, everything else, they're not going to all be built at once. There's going to be a runway associated to that, with that. And so that's why I've spread it out a bit. Does that make sense? Does everybody? Okay. And so what does that mean? So that means our new growth number goes from $500,000 a year to $1 million a year in new growth annually. So what does that mean? Well, that makes a little bit of a impact, about 20%, but it doesn't solve the issue. We still, in FY 2031, will have a $7 million deficit after that gets factored in. You know, if we had a $2.5 million deficit before in FY 27, looking at a $500,000 new growth number, if you do some quick math and you put that up to 1 million, our deficit goes to 2 million. So still pretty significant. So that's, you know, scenario number 2, if you will, right? What does that look like? And then in FY 26, if you recall, as part of our Triboard discussions, what we ultimately decided to do was take 2.2 million out of our rainy day stabilization fund and use it to balance the budget. And so what if we continued that practice? What if we continued to fill those deficits with stabilization funds each year? That's one-time funding each year. You know, in FY 27, again, I'm using those enhanced new growth figures, the $1 million. You know, that would be a $2 million transfer in FY 27. In FY 28, that's a $3.2 million transfer. Okay, that would balance the budget for those years. And then in FY 29, it's a $2.8 million transfer, but we still have a significant deficit, and our funds are depleted. So if we continue that strategy and not put money back into the stabilization fund, which, you know, we have done before using free cash, but that is tenuous, we'll be able to balance budgets until FY 29. So FY 27, FY 28, we'll get a couple years relief. So as you can see, it's not really a solution. It's more like a bridge if we decide to use that. And again, they're finite resources, the stabilization fund, and they really should be used for emergencies and one-time expenses.
Michael, can I ask a question?
Sure.
How much of the town, or the overall Ashland budget is funded from external sources? So the schools have some grants, you know, that come in Chapter 70. Are there other external, that could have a risk of going away?
Oh, Marcy, that was a good segue into what I'm about to get into.
Oh, it's like
magic. We did not have a conversation beforehand.
Okay. Thanks.
Because this is a question. Like, okay, if you don't have it in tax revenue, how can you, I mean, there are other ways we can make up for it. Or why can't we just make cuts? You know, why can't, you know, we've got all these new faces, right? You know, not necessarily talking about, you know, exchanges. You know, people will think, I think sometimes that they're all ads, not just replacements. But as you'll see, we've already implemented significant, you know, budget reductions, or not necessarily reductions, but kept things stable. And we've already maximized a lot of our alternative revenue sources. So let's talk about overall what we've done to go ahead and go ahead and balance the budget overall. Because I think, you know, we're having these serious conversations, and I think I said at the beginning, it might seem like a surprise, but we have been working up to this for several years. It started in FY 2019 when we cut the Municipal Efficiency Fund at $25,000. Who remembers the Municipal Efficiency Fund? Yeah, I didn't think so either. It's kind of a nerd thing, a municipal nerd thing. It was a fund that we had set up and where departments would submit proposals for projects that were relatively small in scale or cost that they proved could provide a return on investment. It was kind of like a bank. So one of the things we did is we got the poll pads. You remember, you see those at town meeting. You know, instead of having all those people there checking people in, we have the poll pads. It makes it a lot more efficient. But, you know, we started getting some lean fiscal times, and we decided to cut that. In 2021, we reduced our pay-go capital that we had worked hard to get up to $750,000. We then reduced it down by $250,000. And then in 2023, we reduced it again to zero. We reduced it by $500,000. So in 3 years, we went from a $750,000 pay-go capital line in the budget to zero. In 2023, we also switched our SPED stabilization fund. So we were using it at the end of the year to basically any kind of, you know, unaccounted for expenses that were coming in that we hadn't planned for. We now anticipate that and put that in front, basically, of the year, in the beginning of the year, and that helps us balance the budget. And then we started getting into some serious one-time fund usage and some serious deficits. So with the ARPA allocation for budgetary purposes, I put $3.5 million in here. That's actually a mistake. That was the total amount we used. A lot of that was for capital, but $818,000, again, I need to correct that, was actually used for ARPA to balance the budget, or from ARPA to balance the budget. And then we also used overlay surplus, which again is a very, very finite resource. I won't get into what overlay surplus is, but we tapped into it for $350,000 in 2025 and $150,000 in 2026. And then finally, the big one, we had to go to the stabilization fund. You know, no magic anymore. Like no magic happening. $2.2 million came out of the stabilization fund, the rainy day stabilization fund, in order to balance our budget. This, you don't have, I included a sheet in the back because I don't think many people could read this. So I went ahead and included it in the back. And it's basically your FY26 budget revenue figures, including, it also includes 25 and 24. And I've highlighted where those one-time funds are seen in that chart. But to Marcy's point, like, we have maximized other revenue sources and grants and revolving funds, things like that. So for our fire department, we used $1.3 million out of the ambulance revolving fund last year. So we didn't have that resource until like FY17 or FY18, but we have increasingly used that to help balance our fire department budget. So that $1.3 million, about $450 of that was for an ambulance. The rest of it was for salaries and wages in our fire department, so a significant amount. Our recreation revolving fund funds the vast majority of our recreational operations at $505,000. The meals tax, which we passed back in 2013, didn't go into effect until 2014. That provides $300,000 for us to provide services. Our building revolving fund, we tap into it for $142,000. Animal control, so we have a shared service agreement. We regionalized with Hopkinton to bring in some extra revenue, $114,000. Other sources, like the STOP grant that we use to fund one of our positions in human services, you know, some other things, those total up to $185,000. So, I mean, you can see this adds up to $2.6 million, which represents almost 20% of the general fund budget for municipal departments, municipal services. That's a lot, folks. That is a lot. Marcy, does that help answer your questions? Okay, you got a little bit more want a little more detail there?
Give me the Excel files.
Okay. And let's talk about what our staff looks like, okay? So we have added positions, right? No doubt. As this town has grown, we have had to add positions. So we've added positions in police and fire. We've added positions in library, but we know what, we had to do that because if we did not, we were going to lose state aid. We would lose our certification. We were on waivers for many, many years, and we would lose certification and state aid if we didn't fund the library at a certain amount. You know, community center, we've started a human services department. It's a vitally needed resource for this community, especially as our population changes, and in DPW as well. But if you look at how the town has grown versus how our staff has grown, it's virtually identical. So in 2007, we had 1 employee per 132 residents. In 2025, we have 1 employee per 127 residents. And one important point here is all of this staffing, the staffing increase, at least on the general fund, 95% of it has been funded through outside sources. Part of Beth's position, our communications position, that comes completely from outside sources. 9 of our firefighters are funded completely through outside sources. Sam, our sustainability coordinator, who does a ton of work bringing in grants into this town and bringing a sustainability lens to everything we do, that's funded through an adder on the aggregation program. We have maximized as much as we can with outside resources. And then the key difference is in 2007, what infrastructure projects did we do back in 2007? Nothing. We didn't do sidewalks. We didn't really do roads. We didn't do water sewer work. We certainly didn't do community development projects like the Riverwalk. I mean, we had just completed building a high school, a community center, and we did some renovations here, but that was it. I've looked through the town meeting warrants. I've asked everybody who's been here. We didn't do anything. And we're playing catch up now to a certain extent. Just ask our DPW and how many water main breaks they go on. And then, you know, you look at what our departments look like compared to other communities and what they're able to provide. And so I use our old friend Sudbury. We're back to Sudbury, right? And I know, oh gosh, how could you use Sudbury? Oh my gosh, they pay, you know, twice as much in taxes. It's virtually the same size as us. And I hate to tell you this, back in 1985, average home value for Ashland and Sudbury was virtually identical. And we all know correlation does not mean causation, right, Makita? But Sudbury starts passing overrides, start enhancing services. Why did people move to Sudbury? Why is everything so expensive? Because of schools. I would say services, but you know what? They don't even have sewer. They don't even have trash. If you want trash service in Sudbury, you have to contract a private hauler. But looking at some of the departments that we do share, you look at our conservation department. So they have nearly twice as many staff as we do in conservation, and yet we do significantly more violations. I think it's probably it was 4 times as many violations, you know, that require ongoing enforcement, ongoing action. And what makes our team so dang special is that they do more with less. So our conservation agent, Becca, anybody who knows her knows she lives and breathes this stuff. She's also our tree warden. She also works with land stewardship. She does stuff, you know, with some of our properties that we've owned or that we own. And she also helps with stormwater. And she also does all these educational programs. That stuff is not assigned to the Sudbury staff. Looking at our planning department, they've got twice as many FTEs, and yet they do half as much as we do. You know, if you look at the different type of permits, a planning board issues and a zoning board issues, you know, special permits are the one, and 40Bs are the ones that take the most time, taking an inordinate amount of time. Paul, I think you got a family member that could probably attest to that, you know, but, you know, it's a lot more in terms of workload. But our planning staff also work on projects. It's a little bit different. They don't have like a special projects person the way a lot of communities do. In our building department, again, half the staff bringing in, you know, 59% more revenue. Now, a lot of that's, you know, can be out of their hands in terms of what comes in, but they still have to do the work to inspect it. So we talked a little bit about tax. So before I jump on, does anybody have any questions about what I've shared so far? Okay. So let's talk about some comparisons with other communities. And I think that is important because while this discussion is mainly about the quality of life we want here, it's important to look at what other communities are doing so we can show value. That's important. We need residents to know that, hey, we're already a good value, and so if you choose to invest more with us, you're making a smart decision. You're making a smart investment. So I usually show the average single-family tax bill, and we're, probably in the bottom, third, maybe at the top of the bottom third, if that makes sense. Geez. Probably an easier way to say it's fifth or sixth from the bottom. But what I want to look at is what's the growth rate look like in the tax bill? So if you look at the average single-family tax bill from 2016 and you compare it to 2025, how much has it grown during that period? And so we're like smack in the middle. So our tax bill has grown 35.46% in that time period, compared to some of the other communities, the 17 other communities which I've chosen, which range from Marlboro at the bottom to Millis at the top in terms of growth in average single-family tax bill. So why did I choose these 17 other communities? It's because those are the 5 communities that immediately surround us and the communities that surround them. And so why did I choose those? When you have communities like, Sherburne, obviously very wealthy communities, but then also, Marlboro and Framingham, because we buy the same materials from the same vendors, we compete for the same people, all within that region. And so we have to pay competitive wages, we have to pay prevailing wages, we have to pay prevailing rates for services and goods. That's why those are chosen.
Michael, just on that chart, is that just the base levy increases? Or, for example, our building projects, the tax bills, or is it the end tax bill, or are you just talking about levy increases?
It's the end tax bill.
Okay.
So that includes debt exclusions, things that we've added on over the years. And so I wanted to do a little bit more analysis and then look at, okay, we talk about the growth in tax bills, but let's talk a little bit about affordability and what is the growth in our per capita income as well. So I compared those two. And so out of the 18 communities, Ashland is right in the middle. So it's a little bit better than average. It's number 10. And so the differential is 15.7%. So Ashland, on average, Ashland residents have seen their income increase 15.7%, more than their tax bill has increased. Does everybody understand that? Okay.
Michael, so that's the average, right?
Right.
So that's everybody. So if we had people on one end of the spectrum who had dramatically greater increases, then that would raise that number, right?
Yeah, increases in?
In income growth.
Yes, correct.
Right. Because one of the things I'm kind of thinking about is, is the stratification that maybe we see in the country reflected in Ashland too in terms of wealth, right?
Yeah. I think, Claudia, I don't have the data here for that, but my instinct is that yes, and I think every community is seeing that.
Well, some communities probably more than others.
Maybe, yeah. You're probably right. Look at this. If you look at the ones that had the tax rate or their tax bill grow faster than their income, those are Westboro, Wayland, and Weston, right? But if you look on the other end, the ones where their income rate was significantly more than the tax bill increase, you're looking at Southboro, Upton, and rounding at the top, proving that the rich do get richer sometimes, is Sherburne at 82%.
Mike, if I can just follow up on that, because I was having the same thought that Claudia was. Examining the median figure, right, which gives us a better sense of that, I think is going to be important for us to understand sort of where our community as a whole really is.
Okay. So median would be important as opposed to just the mean
I think it's something we need to be cognizant of.
Yeah, and really just be careful. I appreciate you putting this up there, so take this for what I'm really intending is, you got to be careful on how we position things like this, because the residents' income didn't increase 15%. The incomes of the residents are up that. In other words, you don't want to message it that you're talking to someone who's struggling to pay their bill, whose income hasn't gone up 15% in that time. So the Ashland resident that has been here for 20, 30, 40 years may not have seen that increase in that. And so when I saw that, I'm like, oh, because it almost sounds like, hey, we built these expensive homes, people moved into them, and now we look at it as in value but when we're trying to talk to people who are at the different end of that, right? That's not going to resonate. It's going to resonate probably counterproductive to a conversation. At least it could. And I'm not. I appreciate you putting that together. I'm just looking at it when I had a similar reaction, but it was just like, ooh, I don't think it means that everybody's income went up like that. And I'm concerned with, and it's just going to be one data point. I get it. So we're not going to hang our hat on that, but I just can see how someone can read when we say that, as in like, hold on a second, my income hasn't gone up 15% in that time frame.
Well, it's interesting. Actually, the income in Ashland has gone up 51%.
But not every individual person.
You're always going to find, that's what the average is.
So so just to piggyback on what Paul said, I think the underlying message of that says, well, then you can afford to pay more. And we don't want to, that's not the message that we would deliver. The message that we would deliver is, this is what it's going to cost for us to have level service and keep the quality of life in Ashland, and then kind of work the numbers if we have, whatever numbers we, but I kind of have a little bit of the same kind of cringy thing because that to me is like, well, Ashland's dead center, so you guys can afford to pay more, and I don't want to message that.
And I mean, the way people interpret it is the way people interpret it, I think. I think ultimately, like the question is what kind of quality of life do you want? Right?
What I take from this, we should focus on. That's.
But this is
what I take from this actually is, to your point, I don't think we should be focusing on the growth of income of Ashland. It's our efficiency as a town. And so I think you can use these numbers to to give that message. It's a different message, and it's not about the income. I mean, you need a ratio to look at, but that should be the point of this metric. Our income, the median or, the full average, that's a different conversation. And it does, of course, mean, well, you can pay for it. That's not what we're trying to, that's not what this should say, I think, is the efficiency, which can only last if we keep up with costs. So I think you have to massage these, the numbers are great, it's just the way we message them.
Right, some of these things are hard to communicate to the voter.
Because the first thing is you look at is, we make that
So
much more money.
I just want to say, the reason this is in here is because I was asked before when I would put up the single-family tax bill, well, what if our incomes?
Right.
And
So
I
that's
didn't mean to throw a monkey. I think you're doing exactly what she's talking about. What you're trying to convey is efficiency and value, right? And when I'm just communicating as we look forward to how we communicate these things, and this is just a data point. I looked at it and I'm like, ooh, I had that moment of like, ooh, I can see someone who is resistant to the conversation, looking at that data point and how we might say things. And I just highlighted as those are the things that we need to be careful of, because we can do 99 things really well, but the person that we need to reach is the one that's going to latch on to the one that resonates poorly with them.
Right.
And so we just need to be really, really, almost more mindful of those pitfalls, to not step in as few of those as we can.
And that's a good point. And I think, Paul, you also kind of unearthed a little bit of something else there, which is if you want to find a reason to not vote for something or to vote for something, you're going to find it. You can take any of these numbers and kind of come up with an argument against it.
Well, but I think to Paul's point, I think in terms of it's the messaging of it, not the numbers itself. But I think we also have to be very mindful of how, if we're moving forward and asking the community for an override, a huge chunk of this conversation is going to happen by people who have small snippets of information on social media.
Exactly.
And this, I think, is something that can be taken very much out of context and remessaged if we're not very careful in terms of how the data is shared. And so I think that, to your point, in terms of the message of it, I think we need to be super mindful of how we share the numbers, what they mean, how these things are explained in a way that people can understand, because this
Right.
is really confusing, frankly, like reading through some of
So
this.
I'm not doing a great job?
No, you're doing a great job.
I'm not clarifying.
But you're talking to a room full of people who have a baseline of understanding of what these are, and it's still confusing, right? So kind of thinking through ways to really simplify the message of what do these numbers mean, and why are they important to understand as part of the conversation? Because I think
that's fair.
all of this is going to be taken wildly out of context in snippets on social media, because that's just what happens now.
No, Tina.
And it can
No.
really muddy the waters, yeah.
You're right, and actually, hold that thought, the simplicity of the message, and I'll come back to that, because I think we can learn a lot from some of our previous attempts. But Chantal, again, we did not communicate beforehand, but your efficiency comment leads us right to the best overall metric that we can use for overall efficiency, which is the expenditures per capita. So just like, the per pupil expenditure, you look at how much money a school district spends on its school system, and you divide that by the number of students that it serves. You basically take the municipal, or not just the general fund, but the entire budget, and divide it by the per capita, or the number of people, and you get a per capita expenditure number. So very similar to the per pupil expenditure. And then I also added on the enterprise funds that you see there in orange, just because I know, some of our fees are higher than the average, like our sewer fee. Water fee is reasonable, very reasonable, but our sewer is extremely high. And so I wanted to, try to get as much of a big picture here as we could. And so that combined expenditure per capita, again, we always rank towards the bottom, if not the bottom. We're here second from the bottom. When you look at the 18 communities, Upton is a unique community going through a lot of changes right now. But this just shows there has been minimal investment in the community in terms of general operations.
Okay, so this does not have the debt exclusion numbers in this, right?
No, I believe it
General and enterprise
does.
fund expenditures.
I believe it does, because I believe this takes our whole budget and divides it by the number of people. And so that would include the debt service numbers. So Yolanda, just take the expenses line on the budget, the total budget, and divide it by the people.
Okay, so you're saying this, what we're seeing here for Ashland and all these other communities includes debt service for all these communities as well as for us?
Correct.
Yeah, and this is just a general comment I was going to have for everyone, but you and Jim, as we present these things, I would always encourage us to be putting the data sources and links to the data sources
good
at the
point.
bottom of these things. So it's not just trust us, here's the thing.
Good
Or
point.
if somebody wants to look at it, somebody has that question, right? We can't spell it out with every single lens. So, Jim and you and anybody that's going to be putting out something, let's just be really super transparent and have a link to the cherry sheet or whatever it is.
That's a good point.
And maybe a little snippet of, we pulled this and, just how we, because we're trying to make it simple, but you want people to be able to say, hey, I have more questions about it, or I'm not just going to trust you, Michael. What is it? How do I do this? And
Yeah.
so just for whenever we're putting these things together, let's start to try to do that, because that'll be part of our messaging and part of our transparency and trust, right? I think we've built up a lot of trust over the last decade or so, and I think that would just help in the conversations going forward.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'll just say, the comparative data comes from the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. So yeah, we should include that moving forward. I can tell you, if you just look at our tax, if you took $100, right, and you said, okay, let's break it down and figure out, how much of $100 goes to, our departments. Nothing here is really out of the ordinary, folks. $55 going to education, that includes Keefe Tech and the Ashland Public Schools. That's generally normal. Where we really get hurt, I think sometimes, is that benefits and insurance number. And I'll get a little bit more into that. What's driving a lot of this deficit is our fixed costs. I think, Marcy, you mentioned fixed costs earlier. Health insurance. When we joined the GIC back in like 2014, 2015, we saved a lot of money at the beginning. So we saw an immediate savings, and then, we started seeing less of an increase than our previous health insurance group, the West Suburban Health Group. And so the GIC became very, very attractive to other communities. And guess what happens? Then they start joining the GIC. And so that starts pushing up costs and pushing up costs. And so I think in FY26, we saw an increase of, it was over 10%, I believe. And that's combined with, I believe it was about a 10% increase the previous year. There's several different reasons. Believe it or not, one of the biggest drivers are the GLP-1 drugs. Those are driving up a lot of the costs, and so the GIC is looking at ways to kind of limit that moving forward. But we're still planning on, the projections, that we have with it going up a continued 10%. Pension obligations are expected to increase, and that could actually go up higher than what we have anticipated. We're basing it on previous years and the growth over previous years. But there's two factors that go into the pension assessment. Number one, it's who are our pensioners, and people are living longer, and people's salaries have naturally grown over time, and so that number is higher, right? And then there's a catch-up provision. So we're required to be our pension system, the Middlesex County retirement system, is required to be fully funded, I believe, by 2042. Middlesex County has decided they would be fully funded by 2038. So there's a catch-up amount included in our regular assessment. So those are the big drivers, because, if you look at a health insurance budget of $7 million, you start looking at 10% on top of that, well, that's $700K just right there. So it can be pretty significant.
So, and Michael, just for transparency, on your previous slide when you had the dollar, that $55 did not include the health and stuff like that. That's part. The biggest part of that component are the school employees. So just to be clear on that proportion, it's not like, hey, that $55 is not all encompassing of that cost, and the other one is I know no one in this room is saying municipal and school, but just as that lays out, it's not, 55 isn't all encompassing. The overwhelming majority of the healthcare is, we have obviously the most employees, so.
Right. That's a good point. I won't go through all of this just in the interest of time, but I can tell you, I met with our fire department today. We have grown their staff over the years, but it really hasn't grown in the last 5 or 6. And they're looking at some of these building projects, and they're like, wait, you're looking at population increasing more, more calls, same amount of people. Now you're also talking about big buildings. We've got 6 firefighters that are scheduled to be on a shift. Sometimes they drop down to 5. Not a good ratio when you see, some buildings, go up in flames, and you've only got that many people kind of running in. Now, granted, we have mutual aid coming in, but it takes a little while for them to get here. And, public safety, DPW, those are kind of easy to point out, right? Those are easy to kind of make the case for. But, we need to look at our administrative staff, which hasn't grown. Like, we need more in our finance. There's a lot more requests for information. There's a lot more information desired to help make decisions. That's important. Transparency is important. So we need that. If we want to look at long-term planning, we need to hire additional planning staff. You know, we need to look at, if you want to look at more projects, et cetera, we need to hire more administrative staff as well. So that's kind of the whole situation. And so what are we, you know, how do we get out of this mess, right? How do we make a change? How do we change the trajectory? We could cut or freeze, right? I already have our departments looking at a 5% reduction for 2027. They're doing 2 budgets right now. As Claudia can tell you, I got a fire chief who's panicked. He's going around squeezing squeezy toys, telling me he wants to cut my budget 5%. You know, I talked to Dougie Small today, you know, at DPW. 5%, that cuts out virtually everything out of salaries and a bit of salaries as well. You know, but that's the number that we would have to hit to basically shave off our portion of that deficit. Or we can increase funding for services, look at a levy increase, and invest in new projects potentially, you know, depending on the amount of that increase. Again, it all comes to, but there's no magic bullets, folks. We've moved to I'll get into this a little bit more, but, you know, we have made some really, really strong reductions in costs. As I've shown you previously, we've looked at other sources of revenue. We use other sources of revenue significantly. Like I said, 20% of our general government budget comes out of grants, revolving funds, and other resources. What we're probably going to have to look at doing is doing something that's kind of in the middle. We'll have to look at a little bit of a levy increase and a cut or freeze as well. You know, what that looks like, you know, these conversations are going to evolve, and that's how we'll get a little bit more fidelity to that. But if we do go for an override, it's important to talk about what it's going to cost, okay? And so I said a FY27 deficit is going to be $2.5 million based on our current projections. Well, if you looked at a $1 million increase, so that's a $158 increase on the average tax bill for a home valued at $720,000. So that's the average single-family home. If you factor in condos, I think that number goes down to, what, $690, something around, maybe a little bit less, Cindy? Didn't have it right in front of me, didn't think I was going to say it. As she's looking for that, I'll go to the $3 million increase.
Michael, is that an annual figure?
I'm sorry, yes, that is annually. That is annually. And then a $3 million increase would be a $475 increase. So a $3 million increase in the levy equals a $475 annual increase on the tax bill, again, for a home valued at $720,000.
And Michael, this doesn't take into account, this is just on the municipal side. This does not include.
No, this includes everybody.
Oh, it does. Okay.
This includes
I
everything.
just wanted to make sure we were on the same page. Okay.
Is there going to be a slide that shows potential cuts and freezes as well?
Nope, not yet.
Has that been, I mean, if you guys have thought about what the override amount would be, I mean, if we had to do this, given this Venn diagram, have you guys discussed it, or?
So John, talking about big figures?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 2.5 million, so you look at 30% on the municipal end, so you're talking about $750,000, and then the balance on the school end. Yeah, you're talking about significant, you know, 1.8 million for the school department.
Okay.
Significant. It's significant. And like I said before, and Jim has said, you know, we're talking about projections, right? So there's a number of things that we just don't know right now, and we'll get a little bit more fidelity on as things go, but we'll have to make a decision on what to do for FY27 before we get that info. We're not going to know what the impact of these developments are, both from a cost perspective and a revenue perspective, until it happens, until they get built. You know, for all the consternation that we have about building projects here in town, only one large one, the Asher, has been built. You know, again, I'll point out, there's, I think, you know, including the 40Bs, you've got 5 projects that are still on the horizon, potentially. State aid, gosh, 1%, that was a killer. You know, don't look at, state's going through the same thing. So I'm not anticipating, you know, a huge increase there. As I said before, health insurance trends, hopefully they'll go down, but if they go down, I'm not expecting them to, completely wipe out the deficit. And again, pension cost trends. Those are really, really hard to anticipate, depending on, who's still on our pensions. Yeah, Joe?
Mike, with respect to the insurance aspect of it, if GIC keeps increasing over the years, would it be safe to say that we may want to start looking at other insurance groups?
Yes.
Okay. And are we actually looking at that now?
Yeah, when does our this round up with the GIC end, Catherine? Yeah, and I think we have requested data. Yeah, so we have to get utilization data first and kind of, have the experts look at that and see and go basically shop it around.
Michael, is the new growth from the Asher included?
Yeah, part of it. We haven't captured all of it. Have we, Don? Did we get all of it?
They're at 100%.
100%.
Already at 50
In 2025, yeah.
And then I have a question, at risk of being prejudiced about schools or whatever, or education, but on the dollar figure, or the $100 figure, $55 goes to the schools. So I always thought it was $70 out of 100.
Are you happily surprised, or?
Well,
Yeah. And that includes,
I think we
Keith.
tried to do, that number you're thinking of, I think is one that was trying to capture the healthcare costs, and it was a more
yeah,
total
okay.
thing. So
All right.
that's
Well,
one of the reasons I
take a
brought that
shot.
up is.
Yeah, I got it.
I don't want that dollar bill to say, that's the schools and this is municipal, because it's not. There's a lot that's overlapping, right? And
Yeah.
so the healthcare costs, if it was that $17, probably $15 that goes over
Yeah.
to,
Back up to 7. So just finally, we're going to get a lot of questions as this discussion evolves. And, two I can already hear because I've already got them. Is, okay, I see the town spending a lot of money on different projects. Sidewalks, buildings, land purchases. Why can't we stop doing those, right? Why can't we take the money that we're spending there and direct it towards the operations that we're talking about? And the thing is, the money that you see spent on those items, those are restricted. You can only spend them on like infrastructure projects or open space, whether it's CPA funds or grants or money from the state that has a specific earmark. I mean, it is a testament to our team as to how much, and our legislative delegation, I've got to give Karen and Jack a lot of credit for, being able to help get us those one-time funds for those projects in order to do it. Now, we just don't have enough people to do them all. We're kind of in this weird situation where we've got more infrastructure money than we do have people to execute it. But that's, it's not something to complain about, right? But we can't, bottom line is, we can't use that money to fund operations. And then the other questions, people are going to be like, my taxes are high already, and so what efficiencies have we done to put into place? And I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to give you some, I talked about the health insurance and the move to GIC. So from 2015 to 2023, the town saved $10 million by making that move. So we compared the growth in the West Suburban Health Group, our old group, and then what we ended up paying through the GIC, $10 million, and that number is being updated to capture the last couple of years. And I anticipate that number will go up. And then the other thing we've done is solar projects, like our street light budget after I don't know if you recall, we got a grant, so we didn't even buy them. We bought street lights with the grant and replaced them with LEDs, right? And so our budget is still the same as it was back in 2014. Same thing with our utility budget. We have a number of offsets and credits that we can use. We directly offset some of that energy use. It's been a significant game changer for us in terms of fixed costs. And then we've made different personnel changes and reductions. One of the things we did is when we moved the school department IT and we started, they still work for both the school and municipal ends, and I will tell you the only way it works is because we have Paul Carpenter and his team. But we reduced, the total number of IT positions here from 6 to 1. We had one IT position dedicated here, and when we moved Paul over, we didn't backfill that one.
So when you say you reduced IT positions from 6 to 1. That you're
Oh, I'm
saying.
sorry, 6 to 5, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I was
I
going to say,
reduced
I'm
it by
like,
one, I'm sorry.
how's that possible? Because, I mean, I know, okay, great. Okay, 6 to 5.
We cleared that up pretty
So
quickly,
we want to make
Melinda.
sure that we,
I was gonna say,
if
does
whatever
Paul know
data
about
we
that yet?
use, we want.
Oh, yeah, Paul's watching it. Maybe that's what my phone
I know we have more than
is.
Paul.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So let's just, end this by talking about next steps. So again, as I said at the beginning, what I really would like is for this board, or the boards, I should say, to take a straw poll as to whether or not you really want to look at an override for FY '27. And so if you do, what we'll do is we'll come back in December and January, and we'll bring to you various override options, what the amounts, what the structures look like. Remember, you can structure it a number of different ways. You can do a menu approach, you can do a lumped approach, you can do a tier. I would anticipate, if everybody is satisfied, the select board would have an opportunity to place the article on the warrant and the ballot for March 26. And then in May 26, we would have the respective town meeting and ballot votes. And if you decide not to move forward, we will continue to look at alternative measures, but they will include service cuts. They will include service cuts.
So I'm gonna jump in. First of all, thank you both to you and to Mr. Adams. I think this has been great information. And I'm gonna bring back something, we had 2 meetings in the spring leading into the 2026 budget that were not public like this, that I think we need to make sure that moving forward, any discussion like this we have, again, is done via Zoom so people can participate and watch, and I think that's important. I personally, there are 17 people in the room. Yes, we're all elected officials, but 17 people of a community of 18,000 people, I don't know. I'm not ready to take a straw vote tonight because for me, as I said, when we were going into 2026, we need to reach out to the community. We need to find out what the community understands and what they think about this, because yes, it's a lot of complicated information, and yes, we are all very much in tune and aware of what's going on, but if we think this is something we need to do, we don't want to start it as an uphill battle with the community, because they're going to say, well, why can't you look at making reductions, right? Why can't you look at what you're doing at the library? And yes, all that we're doing at the library is great, but do we want to continue that? Let's look at what we're doing for wonderful events in town. Do we want to continue doing all of those events? Is that something we support? You talked, Michael, about quality of life. I agree. Quality of life is very important, but I think the other thing we all have to think about is that what I consider important for quality of life and what I can do to support that quality of life might not be what the whole community can do. So for me, I would like us to take a listening tour, create some kind of listening tour, go to different groups in the community, go to the moms groups, go to the PTOs, go to the whatever group we can think of, and to the seniors, to the, all, these different groups, and do a listening tour and say, this, with some of this data, this is good data to talk about what we're doing and what we want to do and to continue doing in our community as we start thinking about this.
So can I ask a question? So what is it, what would you need to know to make a decision? What would you have to hear?
I want to understand what is important enough to the community that we are doing as municipal staff and school staff that they are willing to support financially, right? We do all these great events. Beth and her team do, Fall Fest was wonderful on Saturday. Right? What if we didn't have that anymore? Right? Because that might be something there, right? To John's point, like, we're having the conversation about what we're going to cut, and this is something I've said is, if we do an override and it does not pass, we have to be ready to say, okay, override doesn't pass, as of July 1st of 2026, this is what we're losing as a community. This is what is not going to happen in our community if the override doesn't pass. And again, I don't want to do it as an emergency or screaming and yelling, but we need to be very clear that maybe some of the events that we do at the Corner Spot wouldn't happen because there's staff that have to run that. Maybe some of the great programs at the library wouldn't be able to happen anymore because we don't have the staff to do those programs and to be in the building as much as they are now. Maybe there's something that has to happen at the schools that if we don't do an override, we have to be clear as to what we may not want to do. So I just want to have I want the community to be giving their input to us about what they support, what they think is important enough to support an override.
Isn't
I
that
just
why they
wanted
vote?
to, I want to ask about that, because obviously we're just representatives and I'm not elected, so I'm just a volunteer. We're just representatives of the community, so of course that matters. I'm confused what that would do to our timeline, given how imminent this is. And I think we're saying we recommend, we don't put forth the override, we recommend that an override is needed. And then we take that time to talk through all of that with the town, and the town gets to vote or not vote for it. I think that makes sense, but I feel like one thing we learned is the last time, it was a really long process, if I'm right.
Felt pretty long.
It's not that long. It seemed long, but it was not that long.
But I think some of the things we maybe learned, or you got the sense that maybe there was so much time that it got confusing, and not that we want to rush the process, but.
How it was presented last time was confusing.
Oh my gosh, it was very complicated.
Yeah.
Just the fact that you guys are talking about we didn't make cuts, but when it didn't pass, folks, it was that was never the plan. Remember, the plan, we didn't have a deficit the first year. The plan was to go ahead and pass, it was a 5-year plan, passed an override, and then you would bank the additional money and use it throughout the 4-year period.
So I'll say
Try
that.
explaining that one.
Yeah, I'll say that someone who was a voter and was not elected at that point, I did find it kind of confusing to make a decision. But I do want to echo Yolanda's sentiment. The last time that we got together, when we met, I think in the spring, and we talked about this, we made it very clear, I think we all made it very clear, that we needed to make sure that we had some kind of community input on this cycle, and that's why we're talking now, right? I'm looking at the next steps. It's important. I think it's important for us to inject some element of community feedback before we make any final decisions on what if an override happens and what that looks like. So I think that. I understand the time crunch. I understand that we're running a little late on what we need to do. But I think if we skip that, and we need to identify the best way to do this within the time we have, but we need to include that community listening piece and education piece to determine what our next steps are, because we did say that we were going to do that last time. And I think we do need to fulfill that promise.
I guess I'm wondering, why can't they happen in tandem?
It's
I don't get it.
logistically.
Why can't it happen at the same time?
Like I said, I think but I'm just saying that, we just have to include that, and we can figure out what that looks like.
But if we said we started right now, and then at the end of the year, we come back together, then we're starting again, if we do it at the same time.
Here's why. Again, I'm only one person. There's a lot of us sitting at this table. Because my fear is that if we here go, you know what? We think an override is what is needed based on what we've heard from Michael and Jim.
Yeah.
We're going to start going to the community and they're going to go, you guys have already decided. You guys have already determined.
Well, it
that
doesn't
an
have to be
override-
presented that way. That's part of the messaging. And that's part of
It's
what
not the sentiment at all, and I think, I just want to, I think the
I don't
clarifying part here is tonight, whatever we decide to do, it says here that we're looking at override options. If we do a straw poll tonight and say we're looking at options, and one of those options is not to have an override, I'm comfortable with that. Just say that we're going to proceed and look at these options, include community input and such. That's fine. But to say tonight that yep, we're definitely going to need an override and, we got to figure out how we're going to structure it, I don't think I'd feel comfortable taking a straw poll on that tonight, just for clarification. And I think maybe that's the differentiation here that we need to from a communication standpoint and from a procedural standpoint that we need to make, and maybe go forward like that.
My understanding was that we were going to take a vote on exploring options.
Yeah.
Not saying to the community that we have to do this. So I think that we're kind of on the same page with regard to that, because I think part of our fiduciary responsibility.
Forward with exploring an override for 2027.
Right, and exploring could
I'm reading
mean
from
that
the
we
agenda.
don't do it, yeah.
We just need to be clear about that.
For sure.
Yeah, and that's
Clarity and
important for
transparency is
messaging.
key here.
Yeah, and I think we need to commit
Yeah.
to that community involvement.
100%, agree.
Folks,
I,
Yeah, if I can just, and just to clarify maybe, so ultimately, a decision is not made to put it on the ballot until the select board make that decision. And I want to clarify, there's two bites at the apple here, essentially. You know, you've got a town meeting vote and you have to have a ballot vote as well. As noble as, Yolanda, you and Makita, you know, your intentions are, I've never known that to happen in any other community. In most other communities, the leadership decides, based on the information they have, okay, we know it is going to be a community discussion. The leadership decides, okay, we need to look at making this decision. Okay, we're going ahead and making a decision to put it before the voters and to have that conversation. What you're talking about, I don't think there's necessarily the time to do anything well in that structure. And also, you know, like I said, I think it's very noble and admirable. But I guess I don't really see much of a difference. I guess I'm kind of thinking like the way Chantal does. I mean, that's the conversation. This is what we're putting forward. This is what, and I think we've heard continually about what's important to this community. I'm seeing a lot of head shake, nod.
I think some of it's semantics, which is really important, versus
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
saying we need an override versus we're saying we think we need to talk as community about our options, several of which are types of overrides, and one of their options is not to vote for an override. So part of it is messaging and semantics, but I think to miss the opportunity to start now would be a big mistake.
Agreed. And I agree. I think like we should, if we
Yeah.
decide that we're gonna kind of explore these options, that all of us here, not Michael, but all of us here are tasked with the community engagement over the next 2 months, so that when we do have options in front of us, we have some
Right, so they're
community-
informing the next steps,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
much
So,
informing the
and
next
I would say
steps.
that that's all incumbent on us to have these conversations, and maybe as different boards, we figure out the ways best to do that.
I think that's fair, and I think when we say semantics, sometimes people think that's dismissive, that's not.
Yeah, and I
want
don't
to
mean
make
it
sure.
in a
I know that's
dismissive
not
way.
what you meant, I wanted to clarify that as well.
Yeah.
But because, again, you know, I think we have to be very specific and intentional with our communication, even during our discussion this evening. I think clarifying the point tonight about our path forward was a worthy discussion to make sure that we understood that we are going to go forward and we're going to explore options, one of which might be not pursuing an override, but we're exploring options at this point. And if that's what we're doing tonight, and we're saying that we're going to commit to doing that, I don't have any problems with that, but I just wanted to make sure that if that's what we're doing, we're communicating that clearly.
Yeah, and the other component is, I don't think it's binary. I don't think you can have the discussion with the community without doing the work, because it's going to be it's not going to be a very productive conversation.
Right,
If you don't
right.
come with any answers to the obvious questions and those things, so, and quite frankly, we can't do anything binding because our agenda just says discuss budget.
Right.
So
Right.
we can't take a vote of
Well,
any
it's a straw
substance,
poll.
even if we wanted to. So just be clear on that. But I think it's committing to the work, and I agree with you. I think we talked a lot about the committing to doing the work before, and I think some work's been done, but that's going to be key, because you can't have the conversations without doing, it's the catch-22, and you got to find that right balance of when are you ready to go have that conversation, and you're always going to have people saying, you've already decided because you've done all this work, but we have to do the work
To understand whether it's.
to have a good conversation, because you can't just say, hey, what do you value? Okay, thank you, I'll come back and get, you're not going to get that many iterative conversations, right? So you got to strike that right balance of when you engage during a process of discovery, right? You need the information to have a productive conversation.
I don't disagree with you, Paul. I think that the information needs to come first. I think one of the ways of discussing this with everybody in and around town, giving everybody the opportunity. We've had public forums for a lot of different things, and I think this is really important. It's important for every resident in town. So why not have a public forum on this topic? Have all the answers to the questions we know are going to be asked, like you've already mentioned. And then you're not missing people. You're giving them an opportunity to come to a public forum. Whether they come or not, that's up to them. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, but that's as far as it goes. So you bring people in. You provide them a location, community center, maybe here. We have other, options, Zoom, and WACA has all these different technical advances that we could utilize to reach as many people as possible. To sit and go talk to people individually, that's a great idea, but at the same token, you're putting a lot of energy out there, and you may not be reaching the people that we need to reach. So my suggestion would be to set up a public forum, get the answers to the questions that we know are going to be asked, and then if the people decide to come, they come. If they don't, well, shame on them, because it's their future.
Yeah.
It's their tax dollars that we're working with.
I think, and another, I think a question I would love to know from the community is what kind of information do they need?
Right.
Like what kind of questions do they have? What do they want to know?
I think one thing I'll mention along those lines is, speaking on behalf of the Finance Committee, we're anxious to have public engagement because we feel that there is a mirror that needs to be held up to this community. And there's nothing emotional in that statement. It's just that this math, eventually, if something is not done, there is going to be a fiscal reckoning of some kind. That's just that's it, full stop. I mean, and so I'm not trying to frighten anybody, but a protracted economic downturn with unemployment and declining home prices and rising interest rates and rising inflation will devastate us. And we're not concerned, Finance Committee, again, speaking on behalf of the committee, we're not concerned about a 2% deficit because we know these guys can sharpen their pencils and they might have to lay a few people off, and that would not be great, but we're not worried about that because we know that that can be absorbed more or less and we could probably get by with minor disruption. A systemic disruption, though, 10%? We're not ready for that. And we're not doing this more or less for the residents that are even living here today. We're looking at doing this for the people who are going to be here 10 years from now. That might not be you, it might not be me, but that's the fiduciary responsibility we have to the town. So I hear and respect everything everybody's saying, but to a certain degree, I want community involvement, but there needs to be a unified leadership here, because if we go into this divided, or if people are wishy-washy, and you're entitled to your opinions, I don't mean that in a bad way, but if we're not approaching this in a way that is backed by the data, the reality, and holds that mirror up, it will not work. And I'm nervous about what that means for our future.
Yeah, I
Truly.
think it's, I'm sorry.
Please, no.
I was just going to say, I think for the purposes of how do we move forward from tonight, I personally would like to see us commit to a meeting in December where we talk about, here's the different options if we choose to move forward with an override. Of course, with the option of not moving forward with an override also on the table. What does it look like with that $1 million figure that you said? What does it look like with the $3 million figure that you said? And in terms of how would that impact the school's budget, how would it impact the town budget? And if we don't do it, what exactly does it mean? And so and I would like to see us commit to a meeting in December because it took us 3 months to put this on the calendar and we can't do that again. We have to be mindful of, we have to commit to that. And I think we need to at least figure out the next steps of how do we move this conversation forward. And I think that's the next piece in terms of that very specific data. What would those different options look like? How would they impact the town? And if the decision is no, what does that look like?
To that point, my recommendation is everyone pulls out their calendar, because I mentioned this to Michael. I said, can we put on the agenda that we put a date for our next meeting? Because to your point, it took us 3 months to get this one. And this is important. I mean, if we all think this is important enough, we think this is important enough to meet together, I was talking to someone from another community. Their Triboard meets on a quarterly basis. Every 3 months, their 3 boards sit together. And I think it's something that I think it would be positive for us, especially with these things that we're looking at, to do that. So one, I would, recommend, let's pull out our calendars and try to find a date in December, because if we try to do a doodle poll, that could take weeks.
It's great.
Sorry, just before I forget about it, one of the variables that I think needs to be on the table is just a timeline. That's what made me nervous about what's shown up there, is like, hey, we're going to do this at this time. Let's commit to the work. And then if the work says, hey, we're not quite ready, but we will be, we'll be able to bridge to the next one, right? So let's scrap, we need to have some idea of a timeline to work towards, sure. But let's make sure our messaging isn't like, hey, we're racing towards that date, because that doesn't give us a lot of time to do the work and do some good, if we had a few more months, it might feel a little better, but I just think that needs to be one of the variables that we're exploring too.
The only thing I would say to that, Paul, is, you don't want to say we're racing to this, but we know we have guidelines based on our charter and our bylaws of when things have to happen, right? When we have to vote things to be on a town meeting article, when things have to be voted to be put on a budget.
Next fiscal year, something that says, hey, we know, working back from those dates, if we want it at this time, we need to do it then. But I'm saying,
we should have started having this discussion after our budget in the spring, right? When we used $2 million in surplus funds to close our budget gap, right? And we knew that. When we had our Triboard meeting, we were talking about how we need to start the discussion sooner rather than later, and because of different things, we didn't. We waited until, October 21st to start this discussion.
Mike, all this talk about time frame and stuff, right? I mean, you guys are the ones who ultimately have to put forth the effort to build out the plan and tell us what you think, right? I mean, from a time frame perspective, based on everything that would be involved to taking it up to a vote, can you just get a thought on like what we need to have done by when? I mean, if Yolanda's point, come back in 3 months, you said? I mean, and look at a plan, is it going to be 2 months, sorry. And, I mean, how much longer, how much time do we have even after that to potentially delay?
Yeah, I mean, the board would need to take a vote by March, just, as
Board votes
Yolanda
March.
pointed out,
By March.
according to our charter and according to our bylaws.
Okay.
Cindy, when are the department head
Would it be
budgets
in
due? November 20th? Yeah, I mean, this is pretty accurate. I mean, in terms of what we need. So, we could look at I think we'll need till late December to kind of come up with some thoughtful and varied options and strategies. We can present that to you. You can give us feedback on that. If something looks good or attractive to you at that point in time, we can go ahead and move forward and start really kind of ramping up and start, collecting a lot of data as to what that looks like. And then, if it is to move forward with an override vote, there's, I think, some things that have to happen, politically, that is going to, require some organizing. And I can't necessarily do that, Jim, and we can advocate, but we can't necessarily be a part of doing that. So, yeah, I think, John, this is a pretty accurate.
Actually, you guys can't even, all you can do is give information.
No, we can advocate. We can advocate. The
I just
superintendent
wanna-
and the town manager can.
Now, I just want to put out my concern about going out for forums, without having a solid recommendation from this group. I feel like we're elected to look at all this information and come to some kind of conclusion and make recommendations. And of course, as any of us who have been through the previous overrides, getting input is part of the whole thing. That's all we did the entire time. Once we decided to do the override, we were in people's homes, we were doing everything we could to educate, answer questions, and so forth. But I feel that what we're here to do is what we just did, is get all the information. We've heard that in a short period of time, we are not going to be able, either on the school side or the town side, to maintain a level service, which is very concerning and should be to everybody. And going out to see if people, like Yolanda, you mentioned it being an uphill battle, like, of course it's going to be an uphill battle, like, that's a given, right? No, I'm retired. I don't want to pay for an override, but I will, because these kinds of things are important to me. So are we asking people if they,
I just want to do a check-in with the community.
On what,
To make
though?
sure that the values that we all think are important to the community are actually important to the community. That's all. And, you know, if people want to wait, we can wait until we have more information and, you know, then go out and ask the question as we have these override opportunities.
But my
I
other
think
concern
we
about that,
need to-
Yolanda, can I just want to
Sure.
finish my thought, just because I'm to the age where I'm going to forget what I want to say by the time it circles back around to me. Yeah, trust me. My other thought is, though, like, without like a recommendation, who's coming to these forums? Like, the people that come out are going to be like the same small group of people that come. It's not the community. It's just, you know, a few people that are going to offer input. And then what are we going to do? If 10 people say they don't want an override, is it off the table? If 100 people, if 1,000 people, like, it just feels very wishy-washy to me when we have a real problem and people have put us in the position of coming forward with potential solutions. Now, they might not like the solutions that we're suggesting, and we'll find that out along the way. We might have to tweak our plan. We might even have to abandon the plan. But I think I'm just against going out there saying, you know, to the 10 people that are going to show up, what do you guys think?
So can I jump in? I've been
Yeah.
trying to listen
Sorry.
as much as I can tonight, but I think, having been one of the people who was on the override committee last time, which seems like somewhere between 5 months ago and 20 years ago, I think there are a lot of things that people put on the table tonight that are really important. And I still struggle, Joe, with something you said earlier about people have long memories. I have a long memory, right? I felt like we were going through that process in a certain way, and it turned out not to be necessary. And so if I'm scarred at that, and I'm on this committee, and I'm going to support an override at some point in time, if there's one put to the community, I'm mindful of that. I think the community input is critical, but I also think that's what the vote is, right? We're all elected to kind of look at the information, to Lori's point, and say, we see a problem here, right? There are a lot of solutions to those problems. Some of those problems might be override. Some of those might be, we've learned the community's like, it's not that much of a problem for them, cut it, right? And that's all they want. But I do think as people who are elected this side and appointed this side, but all the people who are committed to the community, we have to take that responsibility and the roles that we're in and look at the figures and say, we see a problem here, right? And I'm okay sort of making a little bit of an assumption for myself, that is, people like what they have here, right? We can't continue to do that if we don't solve our financial problem. That's my takeaway from this discussion. And so it's not just a matter of like it not going backwards. It's if we just want to stay where we are, we have a financial problem. I think where that leaves me is certainly saying, look, I think it's something that has to be on the table for discussion. I think it's also critically important, and we spent, how many times did you come to my house, Michael, Jim, you too, when we did these forums, trying to get 10 people more, you and I talked about that, Brandy, right? Coming in and trying to get to groups as big as we could, and what we end up hitting was the same 20 people over and over and over again. And so while I think it's absolutely important that we reach out to the community, we have to start from somewhere. And the way I see it, the place we're starting at is recognizing that there is an issue and communicating that out with something that says, this might be a direction we're going in. It's not a commitment. You know, to your point, Makita, it's not a commitment to do anything. I also don't think there's a way that we come out of whatever those feedback sessions is with anything that really represents what a vote will, right? We're going to hear from a certain number of people that have strong opinions on one side or the other, or both, and we're going to sit there sort of still struggling with the same problem. And I think we just have to be honest about that. So my opinion is, like, I'm not committing to anything, but I think we need to move forward with the idea of exploring this. I think we also need to be doing the outreach, whether that's a town forum kind of thing, Joe, and I agree with you. But I also want to be cognizant of what we're likely to get out of that, which is there are a certain number of people that are going to be active that have different opinions. And I'm not saying it's all going to be one side or the other. But we have to be mindful of what are we really going to get out of that that's going to say, oh, there's no way that that's going to happen, or it absolutely is. And I think we have to take our role as leaders seriously and be prepared to say, look, folks, you elected us to try to push in a certain direction, and you guys get the final decision because it's your community, right? It's everybody in this room's community. It's everybody outside this room's community within the town. They get to decide what we're going to do. And one of the ways we find out what they want is putting a vote to them.
when do you see us having more of it? Keep forgetting about this, Mike. When do you see an opportunity to have more solid figures? And I know, I wish I could pull a rabbit out of my hat, but that's not going to happen either.
I would think we have some understanding of, I mean, if we're showing a potential $1 million, that we need either $1 million or $3 million, we've seen from the school department what their potential deficit is. We've seen it from the general government side, what our potential deficit is, right? So for me, the thing that I think is important is, okay, if we need to cut X million, X amount of money, what would that look like? What are some things what are the options of possible things that we may lose as a community? I think that's.
I think from the school side, Yolanda, I can only speak to the school side, but that gets kind of dangerous to start doing that before we actually have to do it, because things change so quickly, like the enrollment might change, so we might not need 10 kindergarten teachers. We might need 8, and so that we're going to look at it a whole different way on that budget season, and then it affects our credibility. If we said we were going to lose this teacher, but then something changed within our system that we no longer have to lose that teacher, that doesn't mean we're going to have the pain somewhere else.
Here's an example, right? Jim has mentioned that the athletic department has a $300,000 deficit every year, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we either have to make up that deficit or do something to not have that deficit, right? There's a number of us around the table that are here in finance, and if you have expenses more than your income, you need to have an idea of how you, and I understand it's tough with specifics, but then we can say, potentially we can say from a school side, we may need to, if we can't meet the expected increase in costs, then we may need to decrease some of those costs. And it's hard because you don't want to have specifics.
It's hard to say exactly what. So one of the reasons why athletics has kind of stayed the way that it is because every single year we're forced with, do we hire the special education teacher or do we put more money?
I've spent the time on this. I understand.
Right, you've been on the school committee, but that's why it's hard to go out to the community though, outside of like the budget season.
So then maybe we don't need those specifics, right? People are saying, well, maybe it's not that specific that we need, right? Maybe the understanding is we see this budget gap between revenue and expenses. We're expecting a higher potential budget gap based on federal income or state income and state aid. So from that perspective, right? If we're looking at pure numbers, we do need a budget. We do need an override, right? If we're looking at pure numbers, based on what we heard tonight, heck, we need an override. My thing is that I want the community I want to know what their specific values are, right? There's a lot of talk about sports. My kids didn't do sports. Does that mean it's not important? No, but it's something we have to think about. Right? We do a lot of community events here in town that are all great events. Are they important enough to our community to support that? Right? The great stuff that's happening in our library, the people we've added in different departments, all the great stuff we're doing in our community center and at our senior center. If people value that, then I would feel more comfortable saying, okay, enough people that I've spoken, and I'll go out and do some of this on my own. I have no problem doing that. If I hear enough people say, I value the things that I'm seeing Ashland doing, and I can get behind this, then I think we should move forward. That's all I'm saying.
Yolanda, we just did that. We spent the last 2 years going through a comprehensive plan.
Yeah.
We have a final document that's very, very ambitious. And I'm proud of the work that we all did.
Yep.
That had so much community input.
Yep.
And very clearly stated what the community wants. And based on all of that, I'm comfortable saying the community wants the quality of life, wants us to not cut services. And so I feel pretty okay about making that assumption. I think that the community needs to react to this specific stuff. I think that that's part of the work that we need to do. But as far as like what the community values, we've heard that from the last 2 years. So I think
We never put a dollar value on it, though, right?
Well, that's true, but that's what the vote is, because I was thinking the exact same thing, is
Yeah.
we know what the community values, and we know what the community wants. The question is, can the people afford it? That's the decision that goes to the community. But I think we do have a great understanding of what this community values, and then, but then it's,
If
I
the
mean, you
board
spend a
agreed,
long time trying to flush that out,
Got
right?
back information via the forums and meetings that we had over the last 2 years. It wasn't just a set of individuals that said one thing at one meeting. It was a collaborative effort by a number of people over 2 years. Over 2 years. So, I don't disagree with what you're saying. The information has to get out there, and I don't disagree. Mark, I agree with you 100%. Gloria, I agree with you. There's a pitfall
Just had a
we have to
question
be
for you
careful
guys.
with. And that's, again, Chicken Little, you know. I'll throw out the libraries. That didn't pass because everybody was, you know, we're gonna lose the library, we're gonna lose the library, we're gonna lose the library. Well, what happened? You didn't lose the library at the end.
We lost the libraries.
I just want to say
Oh,
something.
in school, you're talking about.
No,
Yeah, yeah,
but,
yeah, yeah.
but it sounds like, I mean, it sounds like there is agreement here that, you know, the path forward involves a very strong and clear and intentional communications effort from this group to the community. And we need to listen to find out, we can lay out the options, we can say what we recommend, we can listen as we're gathering this feedback, and to your point, if there's adjustments that need to be, if there are adjustments that we feel that need to be made before the final proposal goes in. I feel like we're all sort of, we're kind of describing the same thing in different ways a little bit, and so we might be missing each other, but I think we all do agree that, we're not making a definitive decision on what this looks like after this meeting. I mean, it's not binding, so that's not going to happen tonight, but we do agree that, we need to get more specific information. We do need to make a communications effort with the community and do some listening, and then finally we'll all end up voting on it. But that community outreach and participation between now and the vote is critical, and that's what I'm hearing from this group tonight.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
Okay.
No.
Back to scheduling the meeting in December.
Yeah, I just have a question, just partially a statement and a question, right? So make no mistake, just from Finance Committee, again, disclaimer, we need to do something, okay? Full stop, all right? The math is the math. I think that what we need to do is and less us, more you guys are the elected ones, okay? We're appointed. All right, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I want no part of that.
But we're consulting. We're
But,
consulting with you.
okay, now we're a team, I get it. I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, in all seriousness, I like to joke around, I'm kidding, of course. I think when it comes to what being a leader means to me, and I just put it in simple terms, when I'm parenting, I say to my kids, you need to do this. And then I say, what are your thoughts on that? Right? Like, I'm the parent, I'm the leader, I've made this decision, but I want your input, because maybe something that I've just said to you, you see it a little differently. And maybe what I'm saying is not fully the way that I'm thinking that it's going to work out in your favor. So I think what we need to leave this meeting is committing, this is my opinion, on behalf of the Finance Committee, committing to doing this thing, and then going to the community and say, we've decided we need to do this thing. Here's the mirror, here's your community and all your values and all the math. Look at it, tell us what you think, maybe we missed something, and then we have a vote. My question for you guys is, the time frame is ridiculously short. I know you can vote on it in March if you decided to do so. Can you vote on it earlier than that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we could, maybe. Sorry.
no problem.
The process is if we decide to move forward, the latest is March.
The latest is
Plus,
March,
we
okay.
have to look at because we have to get it on the ballot.
Right.
As well as put it on a warrant for town meeting.
Okay, cool. I
So
just
we
wasn't
have
sure
to
if
look at
March
the
was like a
timing.
fixed thing, that's all. Okay, thank you, that's very, drop dead thing, got it, okay. All right, so if we do this next meeting, I mean, I'll get together next month if we can. I mean, it doesn't need to be 2 months. However long these guys need to put together a plan, the sooner the better, because then we can make the commitment, and then we can start having these community discussions, which I agree are very important.
And just as piggyback, one of the things I was going to mention is, as you two are the leaders of kind of putting this together and doing, perhaps if you feel the need to have a workshop at some point that you extend to the group here, and we can post, and whether people show up or not, that's fine. And it doesn't have to be this big formal thing, but the challenge with being public bodies is that iterative conversation and collaboration is cumbersome, as we've, learned trying to even schedule this. So just to throw that out there as a potential tool that as you collect these things, if you want feedback from the group, we don't necessarily need to say, hey, we're scared. You two are saying, hey, I'm going to, I want to see if I can get people's feedback on Saturday from 9 to 11. And we'll all post, and if we can show up, we'll show up and we'll have a collaborative thing. So, because if we wait till, my concern is, you're two people and your staff, and you're going to be collecting data, but there's all these people that are like, hey, what about this? We have lots of different people coming at it from different angles. We need to be able to iterate faster than talking now and talking in December, right? And so my just throwing it out there, if you have the ability to, whether it's on a Saturday, whatever time it is, but if you all want input during there to get, so you're not just coming in, because what I don't want to have happen is you spend 2 months doing all this great work, and then you come here and we're all like, what about this? What about this? And now you have to, when we couldn't be potentially giving you iterative feedback along the way, mindful of how we need to do that as public bodies.
But we could do iterative, right? It could come out to each, come out to each board, and we just respond back to the town manager, right? You don't discuss it with your fellow board members, and you send it back to your, you guys can communicate with the superintendent.
But the iteration does happen, that can go one direction one time, but then the iteration by definition is now the
We also all have
feedback.
meetings between now and when we meet in December, so it could be part of, it could be put on a select board agenda.
I'm just throwing
It could
that
be,
out there
there's all
as
kinds
a
of
potential
opportunities.
if they want to do it. I'm not saying that we have to do anything, but I'm just concerned. Yeah, I'm more concerned of just saying, hey, we're going to next talk about this as a group, and you all have, and you can't work with us except for in public meetings.
I think that's a good point.
So
Yeah.
if I'm just throwing out there as a possibility of, you do that, we post so we can be there, and, if we don't have a quorum for school committee, hey, if the meeting didn't happen, great. If it does, we take minutes and do all those things, but we can have a more productive conversation at that larger meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Everyone, great dialogue. I appreciate it. And I think as we get our marching orders, if you will, the one thing I want to be cautionary of to all of you and to our community. And someone argued that I've been a leader and a superintendent who has a soft spot for my faculty and staff, because I do, and because I think about the morale of my staff on a regular daily basis. And I work hard to develop an organization and a community of learners within my building that is respectful and appreciative and thoughtful of one another. When we start having these conversations and you start saying, hey, Jim, we want you to pull together that 10% cut and be ready for that conversation. I just want to warn everyone here, it may not hit your desk, it will certainly hit mine and it hit Michael's, that there's a morale piece that will impact and infect our school system.
Yeah.
It will happen. And that's okay. It's why you pay me. I can deal with it. But the greater point is, as we start having dialogue in terms of options, I want to be able to be clear and transparent with my folks. They're like, what 25 people are you cutting, Jim? What does that look like? I don't know. I can't tell you that. As hard as I've worked in the 16 years here developing, building relationships with my faculty and staff, I can't tell you that. So it then becomes an issue within our community too, right? Because a lot of our faculty and staff live within this community. And we certainly know where our educators are going to stand in terms of their desires within the budget cycle, in terms of an override or non-override, and cutting this or cutting that. They certainly will be protecting of their roles, as they should be. I have no issues with that. But it's just cautionary. I think we're having great conversation, but I don't think that has even come to anyone's tongue tonight, saying, we've got to be thoughtful. Yes, we may have to go down and have an option that says we have to cut X percentage. But if I went back to my admin team right now, and I know we have some faculty watching this because I've had a couple texts, and if they're saying, hey, Jim, you've got to walk away now and think about cutting,
You already have a directive
1.2.
to cut 5%, right?
No, that's not my directive. I mean, it's Michael's conversation with his staff. It's not my conversation. I don't have that directive. And I think I'm working on my budget. I'm trying to figure out what my budget looks like.
So right now, you're not looking at any budget for 2027 that includes cuts?
I am not, no.
3.75.
I'm working on a 3.75% increase right now, which would absolutely lead to potential cuts.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you're, okay.
Right.
So you're, okay, because
But I'm not working under the presumption that I have to start with a 5% cut reduction.
And my specific instructions to my team were, you're going to do two budgets. So one is a level funded budget, not a level services, but you keep the same funding as FY '26. And then you also do one with the.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, just
Level
briefly.
funded, level services.
Yeah, I've got a couple, so our departments are doing a couple of different budgets. One is a level funded one, so the same funds as FY '26, and there will be reductions there. Or there will have to be some kind of reductions in services there. But then also a 5% reduction as well. And I can support 110% what Jim said. Just asking my department heads to do that has created a level of discomfort. And, even when I've told them, like, if you need to cut salaries, don't cut individual positions, just cut it off the salary line and we'll figure it out. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get a 5% reduction if we do. But, on one hand, I'm saying make a 5% reduction. On the other hand, I'm saying, hey, don't worry about it yet. But one thing I was very clear about is I don't have all to my staff is I don't have all the answers right now, but I will be 100% transparent with you in terms of the direction that we get and the direction in which we're heading. And the other thing I want to point out is there is a time issue here because this is what we're talking about tonight, but Jim and I have to walk and chew gum at the same time. There's plenty of this is not the only thing on our plate. We have a lot of other things that we have to do. And so this timeline is put together in a way that gives us, I think, with the time we have, probably the best possible chance to give you the best possible options.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a little bit about what Jim said, because I have a long memory in this town, and I was here when we had an operational override that failed, and that ultimately we did lay off many people and many teachers, and it was devastating to this community. And I would suggest to you that even today, 22, 23 years later, that there are still positions that we never got back.
100%.
That we have many fewer at the high school, many fewer, think of it, but positions, we have fewer languages that we teach, we never recovered from it. So, but in terms of the morale, it's absolutely palatable. So I just want to, and I was sitting here thinking about that, Jim, so I had put words to it, but it's true.
If you think December is fine, I mean, that's fine. But I think if there is this motivation to do this sooner, I'm first and foremost happy to get back together sooner if that would afford you guys more time. But I realize that we all have different schedules. What do you think? Is December okay?
December's okay. It does not preclude us from having any dialogue ahead of time. And, there's one thing I would ask you to start doing homework on. And if you can't, and it's easy to find these resources on the Massachusetts Department of Revenue website or Division of Local Services, however you want to talk about it, is the structure. So there's a number of different ways you can structure an override. You can structure it as a menu approach, where there's an individual question for different departments. You can structure it as a lump sum, just one big number that encompasses everything that we want to encompass as a community. And then there's also a tiered structure, which I believe is what we tried to do at the last one, where you have like one kind of base number and then enhancements in another number. Both, to get the higher number, both would need to be voted on. So I would encourage you to take a look at that, kind of do some research on that, look at what other communities have done, because I would appreciate your thoughts on that, because that's going to be a big decision, a big part of the decision, I should say.
Yes.
For Holliston, it was just for their schools. When Jim mentioned it, I texted a friend of mine who's on their select board, and
What
it
was the
just-
amount, Yolanda, do you know?
That I don't know, but it was just,
$750?
Yeah,
750?
just under
It
a
was
million,
small.
I think.
Yeah.
but it
That's
was
not
just,
small, but-
it would, well,
I'll
but
take,
it
I'll
was
take
just for their
750.
school department.
Give me
Yeah.
750 right now?
Did they
Sure.
have menu items, or was it just a?
I'll find that out.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's.
Just curious.
Easily
Yeah.
find. So do we want to look at a date in December?
Can I ask one question before you get to the date? And I'm trying not to add to another topic to this, but I feel like the conversation's leading to work for Mike and Jim. And I'm wondering whether or not there's wisdom in having some sort of committee like we did last time, which was a couple people from each of these committees, Jim and Mike, and there may have been some others. I don't know that whether people feel the need for that. And the charge of that committee was looking at the different options, like Michael was just outlining. But some of that was also thinking about the strategy of how to support the effort at that point. Outreach, like we've talked about. I'm not volunteering. I did mine, did it once.
I was just in a meeting today, Mark, and the comment was whoever comes up with the idea has to do it.
Yeah, right, no, but I'm just, quite frankly, in fairness to both of them, like, their staff, they work for all of us. We're the elected and appointed officials that kind of are more directly accountable to the community. And I think part of our jobs collectively is to support both of them in this work, too. So I want to put on the table, maybe it's not something that has to be resolved tonight. Maybe it's something that we talk about at individual meetings and can be taken up once, kind of see what we're even talking about. I don't know, but it just doesn't necessarily feel exactly right to me to sort of say, hey, you guys sort it out.
Yeah, I would support that, because I think part of what happened is we had all these discussions. I think you and I spoke a little bit when we all met as the Triboard. We had talked about all these things we should do. Because no one's nominated or tasked with it, it doesn't happen.
Right.
We come back 6 months later, nothing's happened. That's just human nature. So I think if you do have a committee and people who are committing to working on it, I think that
Well, I mean,
makes sense,
So perhaps
if that's wanted.
how best to support you in this effort, right? We've thrown out ideas, but I think at the end of the day, you're hearing, we want to support you. I'm concerned just about, 2 months of non-communication. I know we'll have meetings and stuff like that. And then we meet and we want more, we want something different, but you didn't hear about it till 2 months from now, right? So I would just throw out, you two talk, figure out.
About what, though?
how-
I think they told us what they're looking for.
Okay, so I'm going to
Yeah.
finish the sentence, but you guys talk, figure out how best we can support you, and let us know whether that is a subcommittee, whether that's your working group, how can we support you to make sure that we meet the deadlines and have productive conversations?
Okay, we can do that, and maybe the best thing to do is check in at our individual meetings, from now and then, and after we have those conversations. I think point. But I would say, just to give us, adequate time to, again, put together some good options for you, I would say, and I know it's bumping up into the holidays, and I'm not totally familiar with the religious calendars, but would at some point the week of the 15th be okay for people?
Hanukkah begins December 14th.
Okay.
What Joe is mentioning December 10th,
December 10th.
after the school committee meeting again.
Similar to what we have tonight.
Wednesday, December 10th.
It's one less week. Is that going to be all right for you guys?
We can make it, we'll make it work.
All right.
We'll make it work.
Does that work for all the whole select
We'll
board
already
people?
be here.
Right,
We
so-
have to move our meeting earlier like we did this time with that. You'd want to start at 6? So
Or, I mean,
I mean,
Probably should.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
9 o'clock
6
now,
is-
so
Yeah.
if it's going to be, I mean, hopefully, maybe it's not as long, because we had to go through a lot more this time, but.
Not a problem for me.
Starting it later,
You
I think
guys.
is going to be, you know.
I mean, if you want to push to 6:30?
I don't need to. What about?
6 is
any
fine.
of you? Are
6
you
is
guys
fine
okay
with
with
me.
Good for
starting
everybody?
our meeting
Well,
at
so
5?
it's more starting our meeting at
Right.
5.
Oh,
which
yes,
is
yes,
what
yes,
we're
yes.
talking about.
Marcy, does that work for you to be here by 5? 6 p.m. Yeah, so we'll move our meeting, Jim, on the 10th, 5 o'clock,
Consider it done.
and then whoever can appear at 6.
Okay.
Thank you both for everything
Thank
that
you
you put
for-
together
Thank
to
you.
foster this
Thank you.
conversation.
Again, you know, I know Jim and I know the staff feel this way too, is, like, we know, like,
It's tough.
this is tough,
It's tough.
but with the team that we have, we'll figure out a solution, whatever that is. I do feel confident about that. I mean, we do a lot with a little already, but this has been an excellent discussion. I feel good about the dialogue, and it's teamwork. It's going to take teamwork to solve this problem, whatever way we choose, right? Whatever direction we go in. And I think this was a good exhibition of what that teamwork looks like. So,
Yeah,
Thanks.
and I just want to, I probably say this each time we meet, but this is unique in the Commonwealth.
totally is.
There's, you can count on one hand, and you'd still be able to ball your fist on how many other communities can have these 3 groups sit here, have a good conversation that doesn't involve, you know, some choice words, have 2 leaders that work so well together. So, and I think it's, a lot of it is the work that you both do. So kudos to you on that.
yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to join the select board? Second. Oh, that's right. We got one more thing to do. Oh, okay, never mind.
Second?
We're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, WACA. Good night.
Thank you. So select board is not done.
Unanimous.
Yes, Select Board, if you could please stay.
Yes, we have to stay.
Oh, you have something else.